Warpinski, if you could please head up to the witness stand in front of me, remain standing, and then raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the hearing now pending, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, Special Agent. If you could be seated and provide us with your first and last name spelling your last.
Joseph Warpinski. Last name is Whiskey, Alpha, Romeo, Papa, India, November, Sierra, Kilo, India.
And what's your current job?
I'm a special agent with the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, or NCIS,
And out of what city?
here in San Diego, California.
How long have you been with NCIS?
Almost 4 years now.
Any prior law enforcement experience before that?
Yes, I spent 7 years with the United States Border Patrol, working out of southern Arizona.
And what kind of training did you receive to work for NCIS in general?
In addition to having a bachelor's in criminal justice and a master's in homeland security, I attended a approximately 6-month-long academy that focused on everything from criminal investigations that were specific to the Navy and general criminal investigations that any law enforcement agency would deal with.
Have you participated in the investigation against Chief Gallagher?
Yes,
What's been your role in that?
I'm assigned as a case agent for this investigation.
And what does that mean?
I'm the one who's in charge of making sure that investigative steps are taken care of, determining what logical investigative steps are necessary, and to essentially overseeing most of the investigation.
I'm going to hone in on a few specific investigative steps. At any point, did you obtain custody of a knife provided or seized by Special Agent Chris Leapart?
Yes,
And do you recall the log or identification number for that knife?
0554 TAC 18.
And what item number did it have within that log number?
The knife is designated as item alpha.
Our permission to show what has been previously admitted into evidence but not published, Prosecution Exhibit 4. Thank you, Your Honor.
Are you publishing or showing the witness? I wasn't clear.
I'm going to show the witness initially, and then I'll request to publish, Your Honor.
Thank you.
And putting Prosecution Exhibit 4 on the witness's screen. Special Agent Warpinski, please let me know when you can see that.
It's here.
And do you recognize that?
Yes,
Is that the same knife that was seized by Special Agent Leapart from Chief Gallagher's locker at work?
yes,
And have you had an opportunity to measure that knife?
yes.
And how long is it?
It's approximately 7 inches, give or take. The blade is approximately 3 inches and the handle is approximately 4 inches.
Permission to publish what has already been introduced as Prosecution Exhibit 4, Your Honor.
You may.
And while that's coming up, just to recap, the measurements on that knife, Special Agent were approximately 3 inches for the blade and approximately 4 inches for the handle.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Sorry, Counsel. How long do you need the blade to be?
The blade is approximately 3 inches, sir.
3 inches. Thank you. Go ahead.
Taking down Prosecution Exhibit 4. Did you have a chance to analyze cell phones related to this case?
Yes, I did.
I want to start generally. How do you, in general, analyze a cell phone for an investigation?
The primary way that we look at cell phones is using a technology called UFED. It's developed by a company called Celebrite. UFED stands for Universal Forensic Extraction Device, and it's used to extract data from a cell phone that puts it into a format that's much easier for agents to look at and to do analysis of.
Does NCIS regularly use the Cellbrite UFED to extract data from phones involved in investigations?
All the time.
Are you trained and experienced in using Cellbrite UFED?
Yes.
Can you briefly describe your training with Cellbrite?
I was provided a one-day-long training by the FBI, the Regional Computer Forensic Laboratory here in San Diego, and they taught us the proper techniques for using the UFED technology in order to extract information from cell phones.
How often, if you can approximate, have you used Cellbrite to extract data from a cell phone?
My 4 years, I mean, at least every week, if not every other week, use it.
And what's the ballpark figure you're coming at there?
I don't know. couple hundred times I've used Celebrite, or at least assisted on many more occasions as well.
Did you utilize Cellbrite to analyze any phones related to this investigation against Chief Gallagher?
Yes.
And can you tell us, where did you obtain the first phone? Well, first of all, how many phones did you utilize it with?
I utilized it for 2 phones in this case. Well, I take that back. I used it for 2 phones from Chief Gallagher. I used it for many other phones in this investigation as well.
And so the first phone related to Chief Gallagher, where did you obtain that phone?
It was seized from Chief Gallagher's person inside the secure space over at NSW, Naval Special Warfare.
Were you present for that seizure?
Yes.
Do you recall the make and model of that phone?
It's an Apple iPhone. It's a 6 series. I don't remember the exact model within the 6 series, but it was some type of iPhone 6.
Did you review an additional phone related to this case that was linked to Chief Gallagher?
Yes.
And when did you receive that phone?
I received that phone on the 12th of September from MAC Tucker.
Did you utilize Cellbrite with both of those phones?
Yes, I did.
Were you able to successfully extract data from each phone?
Yes.
And in general, what kind of data can be extracted using Cellbrite?
It varies by phone, but we can get all kinds of information from phones. And it's one of the things where Cellbrite's always advancing, so we continue to get more and more things. The applications that you use on your phone, sometimes we just get what applications are there. Sometimes we receive the data within the application. One of the really common ones that people are using is like WhatsApp or other text message-based applications. We'll get those messages a lot of times. This will pull your call logs, it'll pull your text messages, your photographs, your notes, your search history, internet history. It pulls all kinds of different information from a cell phone.
Does the Cellbrite extraction, in addition to what you've summarized, will it pull data related to the identification of the user or owner of a particular phone?
Yes.
And what kind of data can it pull?
It will usually pull the phone number that's assigned or last used by the phone. It'll pull information related to the iTunes account for an iPhone that's related to this, or to a phone. Those are the main ones that it'll pull.
For the phone that was seized on, that you seized from Chief Gallagher on 20 June 2018, what, if any, identifying information was pulled from that when you did the Cellbrite extraction?
There was the unique Apple, or the email address that was associated with the Apple iTunes account.
And what was that email address?
I believe it's Eddie_Gallagher@yahoo.com.
What about for the 12 September 2018 phone?
The same one, same unique email address for the iTunes account.
Did some of the messages, did you have a chance to review text message chains seized from either of those phones?
Yes.
And did some of the text messages ever include language or anything else to help you identify who the owner of that phone, either phone was?
Yes.
And what kind of information, for instance, for the first phone, 20 June?
There were, both phones actually shared very consistent. There were a lot of conversations would start where it would be like, hey, this is Eddie, or this is Eddie's number, or things like that that indicated that these phones not only were Chief Gallagher's, but that he was the one who was using the phone.
Now, the text message chains itself, when you pull those from a phone, are contact numbers or contact names listed in there?
Yes.
And how do those contact names for outgoing or incoming messages, how do those get into those text message chains that you pull?
So if I were to take your phone and do an extraction of your phone, the name that would be associated with every single phone number is whatever you listed it as. It's not going to be any sort of official law enforcement name or anything like that, or who the service provider thinks it belongs to. Whatever you put that contact name under. A lot of times you see contact for mom, and it'll have a phone number for them. So whatever the phone user put for the contact information, that's what it's going to be extracted as.
So if I'm understanding correctly, Cellbrite is designed to only pull the name of contacts as created by the user of the phone?
That's correct.
And that's not something you manually enter in the course of that
No.
extraction? Your Honor, permission to retrieve Prosecution Exhibits 26 through 31 for identification from the court reporter?
You may.
Special Agent Warpinski, I'm handing you what's been marked 6 different exhibits, prosecution exhibits 26 through 31 for identification as to each exhibit. I want you to start with that first one, prosecution 26. Please go ahead and go through and review. Let's just start with 26 for identification.
This is an extraction of a conversation removed from the phone between the individual using the iTunes account Eddie_Gallagher at yahoo.com and the phone listed as Edward Gallagher as the owner of the phone. And it's a conversation with an individual identified as Wally with the last 4 of his phone number is 9173.
Now turn to prosecution exhibit 20, or let me stop there. Is that a fair and accurate representation of the text message chain between the contact listed as Wally and this phone as you extracted it?
With the exception of the redactions that have been made, the blacked out sections. Yes.
And so can you explain that? Do there appear to be sections of the message chain that have been redacted?
There are.
Please turn to exhibit 27. And can you review that and then please describe for us what that is?
This is a extraction of a chat conversation with the owner of the phone listed as Eddie Gallagher with a phone number that ends in 0016 and no identifying contact name provided on that one.
And is that a fair and accurate representation of that respective text message conversation as you retrieved it using Celebrite?
Again, with the exception of the redactions that are made that are blacked out on this, yes.
And then now turning to prosecution exhibit 28, if you could look at that and then please describe for us what that appears to be.
This is an extraction of messages between the iTunes account Eddie_Gallagher at yahoo.com and the owner of the phone listed as Edward Gallagher with an individual identified as Chad Gates with the last 4 of his phone number is 9173.
And can you identify which phone these particular 3 prosecution exhibits so far that you've discussed, do you know, were these the 20 June 2018 phone or the 12 September 2018 phone?
These are the 20 June phone.
And that last exhibit, I neglected to ask you, is that a fair and accurate representation of the text message chain between a contact identified as Gates and Chief Gallagher's phone?
Again, with the exception of the redactions that are made, yes.
Now, these 3 exhibits that we've discussed so far, do they appear to be the entire encapsulation of the text message chain, or do they appear to be excerpts thereof?
These are the entire, again, with the exception of the redactions that are made, these are the entire conversations between those 2 individuals from that phone that's found.
For all 3 of those messages?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to ask you to review prosecutions exhibit 26, 27, and 28 to verify whether those are, in fact, entire message chains.
The correction is on 27. 27 does not have the end of the conversation listed. I didn't realize that it didn't have the bottom section of it, but 26 and 28 appear to be the full conversations.
Does 27 therefore appear to be an excerpt of those conversations?
It does.
I want to turn you now to prosecution exhibit 29 for identification. Can you review that and let us know what that appears to be?
This is a chat. This is an extraction of a chat conversation between a phone number ending in 8443 and 2147 is the contact it's talking to under the name J.C. Burns.
And where did you locate this particular chat text string?
This was within the iMessages of the phone.
And which phone was this located on?
This was the phone that I seized from MAC Tucker on 12 September 2018.
And does the top of each of these extraction reports for these text messages, does that provide a date range for the respective message chain?
Yes, it does.
And what's the listed date range for this exhibit?
This one starts on 24 June 2018 and continues until it says 18 August 2018.
And looking at this prosecution exhibit for identification, number 29, does this appear to be a fair and accurate representation of the extraction of that particular conversation with the contact J.C. Burns that you pulled from the 12 September 2018 phone?
Again, with the exception of the redactions, yes.
When is the last message, incoming or outgoing, listed on that prosecution exhibit?
14 August 2018.
So does that appear to not fall within the entire date range shown on that message chain?
That's correct.
Turning to prosecution exhibit 30, can you please take that, Special Agent Warpinski, and look that over and explain to us what that is?
This is a chat extraction between phone number ending in 0016 and phone number ending in 8443. The contact listed for this conversation is Dave Schwartz.
Now, that number 0016, does that also correspond to prosecution exhibit 27, which didn't have a contact listed?
Yes, it does.
So turning back to prosecution exhibit 30, does that appear to be a fair and accurate representation of the text message chain seized from the 12 September 2018 phone between Chief Gallagher and a contact listed as Dave Schwartz?
Yes, again, with the exception of the redactions, yes.
And what's the time range at the top of that message chain?
So it extracts it as two separate messages. I'm not exactly sure. Sometimes this will extract them as maybe like chat messages and iMessages, or like text messages and multimedia messages. So it lists the messages in two different blocks. The first one is just June 25th, 2018. It's just that date, and just at 9:48 and 14 seconds in the morning. The second one is listed as 22nd of June 2018 through 2nd of September 2018.
Now, please turn to prosecution exhibit 31. And what does that appear to be?
This is a extraction of chat messages between the individual identified as Eddie_Gallagher at yahoo.com and an individual listed as Bito, B-I-T-O. The last four is phone number 8443.
And does this appear to be a fair and accurate representation of that chat conversation between Chief Gallagher and the contact listed as Bito as it was found on that 12 September 2018 phone?
Yes, and just like one of the previous ones, there's two separate sections on this. This one is clearly identified as there's iMessages, so like text messages on an iPhone, between iPhones. And then the second section of this is WhatsApp messages that are listed as well.
And did this message chain with the contact labeled as Bito, did this include any sort of image files or attachments at any point in the message chain?
Yes, it did.
And on what date do you see a message with an image attached to it?
30 August 2018.
And is that an incoming message or is that an outgoing message?
Incoming.
So that's a message, an attachment coming in from the contact name Bito?
Correct.
Your Honor, I apologize. Permission to approach to provide what I'd ask to be marked as Prosecution Exhibit 32 for identification.
You may approach.
Providing the court reporter with the proposed exhibit. And when the court report is prepared, Your Honor, permission to retrieve that and provide it to the witness?
Go ahead.
Special Agent Warpinski, I'm providing you what's been marked as Prosecution Exhibit 32 for identification. Can you look at that and inform us what that is?
This is an extraction from within this conversation with the individual identified as Vito, or contact name as Vito. This is the photograph that I mentioned is incoming to the device that I've seized, that I reviewed.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of that attachment on that incoming message that you were able to extract from Chief Gallagher's phone?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the government would move prosecution's exhibits 26 through 32 into evidence and ask for the words for identification to be stricken.
Defense objection?
Brief couple of questions for the witness, Judge.
You may.
Special Agent Warpinski, who decided which portions to redact in these various proposed exhibits?
I do not know that. It was not me.
It was not you.
That's correct.
Were you involved in the decision at all?
No.
Have you reviewed the redacted portions?
Yes.
Familiar with the redacted portions?
Yes. I mean, by no means do I have them memorized or anything like that, but I have reviewed them.
But you'll be able to answer questions about the redacted portions should they be presented to you?
I might need to review the originals that were put into the case file, but I can't say without having a specific question about those.
Your Honor, I have no objection.
Without objection, prosecution exhibits 26 through 32 for identification are admitted evidence. The words for identification will be stricken.
Your Honor, prior to a request to publish those exhibits to the jury via hard copy, I just wanted to touch on one other brief topic with Special Agent Warpinski. If I could have one moment. Special Agent Warpinski, did you have an opportunity to interview SO1 Corey Scott in relation to this case?
Yes.
And did he provide you a statement with how many times he saw Chief Gallagher stab the wounded ISIS detainee?
Yes.
And what did he tell you in terms of the number of times?
Multiple times. I believe he said 2 or 3.
Thank you. At this time, Your Honor, I'd ask to publish prosecution's exhibits 26 through 32 to the members via hard copy.
You may.
Your Honor, can I do that myself, or should I request bailiff assistance?
Okay, would you come? Thank you.
Chief Gallagher was taken into custody on September 11th, right?
That's correct.
At a clinic for traumatic brain injuries?
That's my understanding.
Not on September 10th, right?
That's correct.
Not September 12th,
That's correct.
September 11th.
Correct.
Special Agent Warpinski, have you ever heard the term adding insult to injury?
Yes.
I want to ask you a few questions, sir, about your work on the case, but before we get into it, how old are you?
34 years old.
At the time you started your work on this case, you'd been at NCIS for about 2.5 years or so,
Approximately.
and you were the lead case agent.
That's correct.
As the lead case agent, you're familiar with the reports that have been filed in this case,
Yes.
and you're familiar with the evidence that's been collected in the case.
Yes.
This was your case, correct?
That's correct.
This is the first case of a death in a foreign combat theater that you'd ever worked on, right?
That's correct.
A couple background questions about your training. You're not a trained sniper, right?
That's correct.
And you're not a trained medic.
That's correct.
Now, you mentioned, I think, that you attended the Criminal Investigative Training Program at FLETC,
Correct.
the Federal Law Enforcement Training Academy.
Yes.
That's a basic course, correct?
That's correct.
Every single law enforcement agent in the United States takes that course, right?
Every special agent takes the class that I'm talking about.
And there are other programs offered by FLETC, right?
That's correct.
Just wondering whether you ever took what's called CSITP. You familiar with that?
Yes. Correct. crime scene investigation
Training program. Did you take that?
Yes, I did.
Now, when you were down at FLETC and you were getting trained, did you do that thing where they put you in a mock courtroom and they teach you how to testify?
Not in that class.
But you've done it in a different
CITP,
class.
that's correct.
And they tell you how to testify,
That's
right?
correct. Yes.
And they give you helpful hints, correct?
Yes.
And they do fake examinations on you, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Have you ever taken a defense strategic debriefing course?
No.
Never went to Fort Huachuca?
I've been to Fort Huachuca, not for that class.
Okay, so you never took an intel debriefing course?
No.
Okay. Now, you have not visited the compound where this ISIS terrorist that's part of the subject of this case was brought, right?
That's correct.
And there's been different references to this individual during the case. Some people have called him a detainee, some people have called him a prisoner, some people have called him an ISIS fighter. I'm just going to call him the terrorist, okay? So you know who I'm talking about when I say the terrorist.
Okay.
Now, you haven't been to the compound. The sniper hides that have been discussed in this case and you've talked about in your reports, you haven't visited those sniper hides, have you?
I have not personally.
And you know what a loophole is, don't you?
Yes, sir.
And you haven't looked through any of the loopholes that any of the snipers in this case shot through.
I personally am not.
Okay. And nobody who questioned any of the witnesses in this case had ever been to the compound where the ISIS terrorist was brought, right?
That's not correct.
Are you talking about Special Agent Clack?
Yes.
Okay. With respect to the SEAL witnesses that you interviewed, let's focus on that.
Okay.
Nobody who questioned the SEAL witnesses during your investigation had ever been to that sniper, had ever been to the sniper towers, right?
That's correct.
And nobody who questioned the SEAL witnesses had ever been to the compound where the terrorist was brought.
Correct.
And any of the testimony that you're going to talk about today, any of the subject matter you're going to talk about today, anything that you wrote in your reports, you have no personal knowledge of what happened in Iraq, right?
That's correct.
Everything you know, or everything you think you know, or everything you were told is by other people, right?
With the exception of the searches that were conducted.
Okay, we're going to get there. Now, this case came to you April 2018, right?
Correct.
And that's something around 11 months after the terrorist death, right?
That's correct.
And by the way, you have no forensic or scientific proof that this terrorist who was brought to the compound is dead, do you?
It's just based off testimony.
That's not my question. My question is, do you have forensic or scientific proof that the guy's even dead? No.
I would agree with that. There's no autopsy or anything to confirm it.
Now, there was no referral to your office, to NCIS, in 2017 of the death of an ISIS terrorist in the compound, right?
Correct.
And there was no referral to NCIS in 2017 of any little girl getting shot from a sniper hide, right?
Not that I know of.
And there was never any referral in 2017 to NCIS of any old man getting shot from a sniper hide, right?
Not that I know of.
And that's not in June 2017, not in July, August, September, not in any of 2017, right?
That I know of, no.
Not until April 2018, am I right?
That's, to the best of my knowledge. I
And when
can't
you
speak
got-
for the whole agency, but as far as I know, yes.
Okay. And when you got this case, it was ballpark 11 months after these incidents, right?
Correct.
And would you agree with me that it's better to get a case closer in time to the incident than 11 months later?
Absolutely.
And that's because with the passage of time, memories get jumbled up, right?
That's correct.
Passage of time generally is not helpful to your investigation.
I would agree with that.
Now, you know from your work as a special agent, by the way, everybody at NCIS is called a special agent, right?
No,
Well, everybody who's an investigator like you are?
no.
Okay. Every agent who investigates cases is a special agent.
We have special agents, we have investigators, we have MAs assigned to us. So special agents are a designation within that. There are also investigators who are assigned to us.
Very well. Let's talk about service members' duty to report. You know, as a general matter, that service members have a duty to report crimes that they witness, right?
That's correct.
And any service member, Navy or Marine, can call NCIS to report a crime, right?
Correct.
And NCIS actually maintains a complaint hotline. Am I right about that?
That's correct.
And the hotline can be called by anybody at any time to report any crime at any time.
That's correct.
And a hotline complainant, if you call up to report a crime, you can remain anonymous, right?
Yes.
And if someone were concerned that there would be professional repercussions or personal repercussions, they could call the hotline, report a crime, and remain anonymous.
In theory, yes.
In May of 2017, you never received any hotline complaint about Chief Gallagher, right?
I did not receive a complaint about it.
And not in June 2017, not in July 2017, not any time in 2017,
I did not receive a complaint during any of those times.
not any time ever.
I did not receive any information about this until the 9th of April, 2018.
So there were no complaints about Chief Gallagher.
That I know of. Again, I cannot say for absolute certain nothing was reported to the agency in any way.
Let's talk about the mobile application. I was actually driving down, I think it's called Harbor Boulevard the other day, and there was like a big sign about NCIS tips, right? You can call NCIS anytime apparently, right?
Correct.
And they actually have a mobile application or a web application where you can make a complaint.
It's a web application.
And I just jotted down, NCIS tips can be used to safely, discreetly, and anonymously report criminal activity affecting the Navy and Marine Corps. Familiar with that?
Yes.
You never received any mobile app or web tip complaining about Chief Gallagher, right?
So I'm not certain that the web application was in service at that time. It's fairly new. I'm the one who put that banner up there, and so I know it's something new that we've just started to integrate. So I can't say for certain that before this investigation started it was in effect.
Well, then it seems to me the answer is no, you never received any tip, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, in the course of your work, you became familiar, at least generally, with the roster of the platoon that you were looking at, right?
That's correct.
I'm going to read you a bunch of names, and you just confirm for me, if you will, the roster of the A platoon.
Okay.
Jake Portier,
Correct.
correct? Lieutenant McNeil, Tom McNeil.
Correct.
Lieutenant Hanson,
Correct.
Chief Gallagher,
Correct.
now Chief Miller.
Correct.
SO1 Chris Schumacher,
Correct.
SO1 Dalton Tolbert,
Correct.
SO1 Joe Arrington,
Correct.
then SO1 Dylan DeLay,
Correct.
SO1 TC Byrne,
Correct.
SO1 Nathan Shaw,
Correct.
SO1 Corey Scott,
Correct.
SO1 Josh Breens,
Correct.
SO2, I believe, Josh Graffam,
I believe that's correct. SO2. Yes. Josh Graffam is though. Yes.
SO2 Ivan Villanueva,
Yes.
SO2 Corey Pullman,
Yes.
SO2 Chris Mullen,
Yes.
Lieutenant Tom Smith,
I don't know if he's assigned platoon or if he was an EOD member working collateral, but yes, he
but you're
was.
familiar with his work together with the platoon.
Yes.
Chief L.J. McCandless,
Yes.
SO1 St. John Mondragon,
Yes.
SO1 Steve Blair,
Yes.
SO2 Mike Stoner,
Yes.
and a MARSOC member, Giorgio Kirillo.
Yes.
Now, let's talk a little bit about how NCIS agents do their investigations, all right?
Okay.
You are trained in the proper techniques for conducting a criminal investigation, right?
Correct.
And you're familiar with the NCIS manual?
Yes.
And that gives you guidance for conducting responsible criminal investigations.
Correct.
And you followed the manual when you conducted this criminal investigation, right?
To the best of my ability, yes.
Is that a yes or a no?
There were times when things fell outside the manual, but attempted completely to follow it.
So there were times when you did not follow the manual. Is that what I'm understanding?
Inadvertently, yes.
Inadvertently.
Yes.
What about advertently?
Not intentionally.
Okay. We'll come back to that, but I appreciate the acknowledgement that you didn't always follow the manual. The manual contains good investigative practices, right?
Correct.
So let's talk about some of these good investigative practices. You would agree with me that the job of a special agent at NCIS is to discover the truth,
Correct.
to find the facts.
Agreed.
In layman's terms, maybe to find out what happened, right?
Agreed.
Got to collect evidence, right?
Yes.
And a good investigator would want to conduct a thorough and a complete investigation,
Yes.
obviously. And a fair investigation, right?
Correct.
During the course of that investigation, you want to keep an open mind.
Correct.
You don't want to jump to conclusions prematurely.
Correct.
You want to remain impartial as you gather the facts,
Correct.
not take sides.
Agreed.
And you'd agree with me that cases are not black and white, right?
Absolutely.
And there are shades of gray.
Agreed.
Fair to say you want to start off an investigation sort of in neutral, right?
Agreed.
Unbiased.
Agreed.
And in terms of collecting evidence in the course of a thorough and complete investigation, there's different kinds of evidence you can collect, right?
Absolutely.
There's physical evidence, things, tangible items, articles, right?
Correct.
Things you can touch and feel. And there's testimonial evidence, right?
Absolutely.
Information you get by speaking with people
Absolutely.
and conducting interviews. I want to start talking first about physical evidence, and that's covered in Chapter 12, I believe, of the NCIS manual. Are you familiar with that?
I can't tell you exactly what chapter it is. There's literally hundreds of chapters.
There are hundreds of chapters. When was the last time you looked at the manual?
It's been, I don't know, 2 weeks ago maybe I looked at it, reviewing.
What chapter?
There were a number of them. I mean, I went through a number of the investigative chapters, but
What caused you to do that?
it's just preparation for trial.
I want to focus on the chapter that talks about physical evidence collection, okay?
Okay.
Now, physical evidence, obviously an important part of any case, right?
Absolutely.
Physical evidence can help the government's case, for sure.
Absolutely.
Physical evidence can help the accused's case, right?
Of course.
And there are standard procedures for collecting physical evidence at a death scene, in a death investigation, right?
That's correct.
Now, I don't know if you can recall this or this is something you reviewed the other day, but NCIS Manual Chapter 30 speaks of evidence collection in death investigations. Familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay, so let's start with the physical scene of a death investigation. The examination of a death scene is an important part of your search for the truth, right?
Correct.
And you're familiar with something called a walkthrough, right?
Correct.
And a walkthrough is a walk around the scene of a death, correct?
Correct.
And it gives an investigator an opportunity to visually survey the scene, right?
Yes.
And to identify potential valuable evidence, right?
Correct.
To identify fragile evidence that may need to be preserved, right?
Correct.
and to document the full scene, correct?
Correct.
And that's an important part of a search for the truth, I would say, right?
Absolutely.
Now, the integrity of the scene is important, right?
Agreed.
You understand what I mean by the integrity of the scene?
Absolutely.
Okay. By the integrity of the scene, I mean keeping things as they were at the time of the incident or making your best effort to do that. You with me?
Correct.
And preserving the scene in the way it was at the time of the incident is important for preserving evidence, right?
I agree with that.
And to the best of your ability, you want to protect that scene so that evidence isn't destroyed, right?
Correct.
Evidence can be collected, right?
Correct.
Evidence isn't washed away by the weather, for example, right?
Correct.
And your inability to preserve the scene can result in the loss of evidence, right?
Correct.
And if nobody preserves the scene at the time of the death, evidence can be lost, right?
That's correct.
Evidence that's helpful to the accused can be lost, right?
Potentially.
Evidence that's helpful to the government can be lost, right?
Potentially.
Now, would you agree with me that another important part of collecting evidence at a death scene is photographing the scene?
Yes.
And that's covered in the NCIS manual, right?
It is.
Section 12.4. Now, the ultimate goal of an investigator at a death scene is to get a photographer who can capture the scene as clearly and comprehensively as possible, right?
That's correct.
And you want to create a visual record of the full scene, right?
That's correct.
It's an important part of your search for the truth, correct?
That's correct.
So you want to walk through and you want to photograph. Now, in the case of a death, another important part of your search for the truth would be an autopsy, right?
That's correct.
I think you mentioned that. We heard a little bit yesterday about autopsies, but I want to dig in a little more from the investigative perspective because we heard about it from a doctor's perspective. Would you agree with me that the single most important piece of evidence in a death case is the body?
I think that there are some cases where that might not be true, but I think that in general terms, yes, in almost all death cases, but I'm sure there's some where it's not.
Overwhelming majority of cases, the single most important piece of physical evidence in a death case is the dead body.
Yes, I would agree with that.
If you have the body, you can do an autopsy, right?
Correct.
And you're generally familiar with what an autopsy is.
Yes.
An autopsy is an examination of the body that attempts to determine cause of death, right?
Correct.
Manner of death,
Correct.
time of death. You
Correct.
with me?
Absolutely.
And an autopsy has two parts, internal and external. You familiar with that?
Yes.
And the internal examination that can be done in an autopsy concerns examination of the internal organs, right?
Yes.
And the internal body structure.
Yes.
It also includes an assessment of things, if they're there, like bullet trajectory, right?
Correct.
Or wound tracts. You know what I mean by that?
Yes.
The travelings of a wound inside the organs, right?
Correct.
And the internal examination also can include an examination of stabs or incisions or lacerations on the body, right?
Correct.
Now, you've heard of something called an exhumation autopsy.
Yes.
Can you tell the members what an exhumation autopsy is?
When a body is exhumed, if at some point it's identified that there might be need for an additional autopsy, the body can be typically removed from the burial site, brought back up, and a second or first autopsy, depending on which one, can be conducted.
Just to break it down a little, an exhumation autopsy is taking a body that's been buried, digging it up, and doing tests on it, right?
Correct.
And it's possible to exhume a body months and even years after it's been buried and still get good evidence out of it, right?
That's correct.
And if you exhume a body, you can perform toxicology studies, for example, right?
Correct.
And you can tell potentially what kinds of medications or narcotics or other toxins had been inside the body, right?
Depends. It depends on how much time has gone by.
Okay. Trace evidence. You can gather trace evidence from an exhumation autopsy, right?
In theory, yes.
Not in actuality. Is that your testimony?
No, I'm saying that there's not always trace evidence, so in theory, you could. If there's trace evidence there, you could collect it.
And trace evidence are materials like hair, fibers, dirt, debris, fabric, etc., that might be attendant to the body, right? That might be on the body,
Correct.
in the body. Now, in an exhumation autopsy, you can also conduct a post-mortem, post-burial wound analysis, right?
Correct.
And all of these, if you could do it, would be a valuable component of a search for the truth, right?
Correct.
Now, you could collect DNA in an exhumation autopsy, right?
Absolutely.
And that could be helpful to the investigation, right?
Yes.
I have tried now to cover many of the kinds of evidence that you could recover at a death scene and that you could recover from a body and that you could even dig up from a body, okay?
Okay.
Now I want to talk a little bit about the other kind of evidence we identified, which is testimonial evidence.
All right.
And by testimonial evidence, I mean what you get out of people's mouths, right? What they say,
Yes.
interviews.
Yes.
And you've told us about the good practices for collecting physical. Let's talk about the good practices for collecting testimonial evidence. Interviews of witnesses and potential witnesses are an important part of any investigation. You'd agree with that?
Yes.
And the aim of interviews is to discover the truth.
Correct.
And your main objective in conducting an interview of a witness is just to find out what happened, the facts.
Correct.
And an interviewer has to keep an open mind, right?
Correct.
Now, an interviewer should not jump to conclusions.
Correct.
And part of not jumping to conclusions is not just taking what somebody says at face value, right?
Correct.
Testing it, right?
Correct.
Waiting to see if other information confirms what they say, right?
Correct.
And in conducting interviews, would you say that it's smart to take a hard look at the person who you're interviewing, right?
I'd agree with that.
And the reason you need to take a hard look at the person that you're interviewing is they could be wrong, right?
Sure.
They could have an agenda, right?
It's possible.
They can make a false accusation, right?
Yes.
A good investigator would try to verify or validate what a witness tells them.
Correct.
And the credibility, the believability, the accuracy and truthfulness of a witness is critical to your investigation.
Agreed.
Now, with respect to the people you interview, and by the way, you've conducted dozens, hundreds of interviews in your career, right?
Correct.
It's important, is it not, for you to remain professional with the witnesses you interview at all times, right?
That's correct.
and to keep what I would call a professional distance from the witnesses, correct?
That's correct.
And it's important for you as a special agent at NCIS not to influence the witnesses,
That's correct.
right? Not to offer your opinion of the case to the witnesses,
That's correct.
right? It's important because what you say to a witness can affect how that witness answers your questions, right?
Potentially.
What you say to a witness can frame how that witness talks to you, right?
It could.
It's also important not to offer other people's opinions to the witness you're interviewing, right?
Depends. There are certain times when trying to confirm certain information and trying to explain other information that you have, and sometimes you need to let them know what other witnesses have said or what they believed in order to.
So you think it's a good practice, and I'm not attacking you, I'm asking about standard NCIS policy, to let witness A let witness A know what witness B is saying. That can't be good practice.
I'm not saying that it's standard. I'm saying that there are times when it might be necessary.
And that, you'd have to agree with me that if you tell witness A what witness B is saying, it's going to have some effect on witness A.
Agreed. And I'm not saying
Okay,
that.
thank you. Now, best practices. Let's meet in the middle. Best practice is not to tell witness A what witness B is saying, right?
Correct.
Cases of yours are covered in the news media sometimes.
Yes.
Would you agree with me that it is important not to offer a witness accounts of what the news media is saying about a case, right?
Can you clarify that? I don't know exactly what you're asking.
Absolutely. I don't want to throw around the term fake news, but there are news articles out there about all sorts of subjects that are not accurate, right?
Correct.
And it would be poor practice for an investigator following the NCIS manual to tell a witness to read a news account of the case that they're witnessing, right? That's not good practice.
There's definitely exceptions to that.
Okay, but that's not a good standard practice.
I would not agree with you on that.
All right, well, we can come back to that because I think we'll get a little insight into that a little later. Would you agree with me that it's not good practice to arrange special favors for witnesses?
I would agree.
And you certainly don't befriend the witnesses. You don't become pals with them, right?
You
Not
don't.
part of the practice.
No, it's a fine line between trying to make them trust you while remaining professional. No, you don't befriend them.
All right, we're going to talk about that fine line in a minute. And that fine line is a fine line or a bright line?
It's clear. It's when you're working with.
It's clear when too much is too much, right?
I would agree.
Now, it's also important, and again, I'm still on what are best practices for an NCIS agent or anybody who wants to find the truth when they're interviewing someone. You with me?
Yep.
It's important not to have too many undocumented contacts with a witness, right?
That's correct.
Because if you have too many undocumented contacts with a witness, your relationship with that witness becomes something that nobody can look at or figure out or read about, right? You want to keep it professional in reports, right?
That's correct.
Important also in interviewing witnesses not to share your impressions of the case with the witness, because that could affect what the witness tells you, right?
Agreed.
And would you also agree that it's improper for an NCIS agent to ask a witness to do your job for you?
No, I mean, that's using someone as a source of information.
So it would be appropriate for you to tell a witness to go collect this evidence and go collect that evidence. I mean, that's your job, right?
That's called using a source. We do it all the time.
Using a source is getting information from somebody, right?
Or asking them to collect information for you, or ask them to collect any number of things. I mean, that's
So
a
you
task source.
so you're saying that it's a good investigative practice to take a witness in a case who's going to be testifying, like right from that box where you're testifying, and have them go and do investigative work for you? Is that the NCIS policy? I'm not looking to fight with you here. I just want to understand what the policy is.
What you need to understand is that sometimes a witness in an investigation is the best person to get that information. Somebody within, in this case, the SEAL community might be the best position to collect evidence.
So
Something
let's agree.
that an outside NCIS agent couldn't do.
So
It
let's agree on
absolutely
this.
is.
When information is equally available to you and a witness, it's better practice for you as the investigating agent to collect it than for you to get a witness to collect evidence.
Depends on the situation.
Now, I want to ask you a couple of questions. I've been asking you about, sort of your relationship or an NCIS agent's relationship with a witness. The idea is you keep a professional distance from the witness, right? I think you acknowledged that a little earlier. Correct?
Correct.
And it's also important for the witnesses, as between each other, not to discuss the facts of the case, right, with each other.
Say that again, please.
It's important that the witnesses not discuss the facts of the case with each other, right?
Correct.
And your goal is to get each individual witness's independent memory of events, right?
Correct.
Unaffected by anything else.
Correct.
And letting witnesses talk to each other about the case is not a good practice for discovering the truth, right?
I don't have any control over whether or not witnesses talk to each other, and I can't tell them they can't talk to each other.
Well, you have a mouth, right? I mean, you can tell a witness it's not a good idea for you to talk to another witness, because then it looks like you guys are sharing stories and concocting a story that you can all agree on together. That's not a good practice,
When I say
right?
I can't tell them, I mean I can't order them.
I'm not asking about orders. I'm asking you about good practices, not orders.
Sure.
It's not a good practice for one witness to share his story with another witness, right?
Correct.
Now, let's talk a little bit about reports that you write up.
Okay.
Not every time you have contact with a witness, but when you have sort of extended contact or an extended meeting or interview with a witness, you write up a report, correct?
Correct.
And that's part of the NCIS manual.
Correct.
And the reports are supposed to be, I would think, truthful and accurate.
Correct.
They are supposed to include all important facts.
Correct.
We can agree they do not include absolutely every single last little detail, but all critical facts.
Absolutely.
And you want to be accurate, right?
Yes.
You want to be accurate about what the witness said.
Correct.
Okay. Now, we've talked about good physical evidence collection practices. We've talked about good interview techniques. Let's take a look now at what you found in this case.
Okay.
Start again with the physical evidence. According to you, the ISIS terrorist died, if he died, because I think we've confirmed you're not even sure he died, but let's assume he died, in May of 2017, right?
according to the witnesses,
That's what your investigation found, right?
yes, that's correct.
NCIS didn't start its work on the case until April 2018. I think we've established that's 11 months, like, approximately.
Yes,
And so you, again, I'm focusing on the physical evidence. You and NCIS, in this case, were not able to preserve the integrity of the death scene, right?
correct,
You didn't know about the case.
correct,
And you were not able to do any kind of walk-through an assessment of the scene in the compound.
I don't know, there was an agent who was at the compound. I don't know.
Okay, I'm not talking about in September of 2018, when Clack, I think Special Agent Clack walked through the scene. I'm talking about
Day
at
of,
day of, next day, next week, next month, 2 months later. You were not able to do any walkthrough of the scene of this terrorist's death, right?
that's correct,
You were not able to protect the integrity of the evidence that would have been there, right?
we're talking about immediately, right then? No,
I'm talking about the death scene, however you define that.
correct. I'm just trying to clarify that you were asking immediately.
There was no medical investigator who walked through the scene, certainly no medical investigator who looked at the body, right?
Correct,
And you weren't here, but there have been a bunch of photos introduced, I think you're familiar with them, of the terrorist as he was laying on the ground in the compound. You're familiar with those photos?
yes,
And I'm referring, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, to government exhibits, prosecution exhibits 7, 8, right around that area.
I don't have any knowledge of
But
these
you know the
numbers.
photos I'm talking about, right?
I believe I know exactly which one you're talking about.
And those photos that we saw were not taken by a trained crime scene photographer, right?
That I know of.
They were, are you telling me there's a possibility they were taken by a trained crime scene photographer?
I have no idea if any of those seals potentially could have had some sort of crime scene documentation. I don't know what sort of training they have as far as documenting any sort of,
As you sit here today, no NCIS or other federal law enforcement agency medical investigator took a look at that scene, right?
immediately when it happened, no.
And nobody who is trained in forensic photography or death scene photography took a look at that scene, right?
No, not when it happened.
And the photos that we saw are, as you said, photos that SEALs who happened to be there happened to take, right?
Again, that's assuming it's seals, is somebody who was there.
Somebody who was there just happened
Correct,
to snap pictures. And you're familiar with the videos of the terrorist at the scene, right?
yes,
And those were not taken, as far as you know, by any professional crime scene investigator, right?
as far as I know, no.
Those were taken by SEALs and with a GoPro camera, right? There's a YouTube video. You're familiar with all that, right?
Yes,
And those are fragmented. They start and they stop in the middle. And so we can agree that because of the circumstances of this ISIS fighter's death and the passage of time, limited scientific and physical evidence was available for you,
correct,
right? And you'd agree that a complete and thorough collection of physical evidence could not be performed here.
yes,
So let's focus on the ISIS terrorists. And again, I'm focusing on the physical evidence here. No body recovered, correct?
correct,
No autopsy,
correct,
no medical records,
correct,
no neck wound analysis,
correct,
no photo showing the unbandaged skin on the right side of the neck,
that's correct,
no depth or measurement of any wound on the neck, right?
correct,
No blood recovered, correct?
correct,
No blood recovered from clothing, correct?
correct,
No DNA recovered from the terrorist's body, right?
correct,
Now I want to just shift gears for a second to one of the other counts in this case, which is this alleged shooting of a girl. Familiar?
Yes.
And let's continue to focus on physical evidence. No photos of the girl, right?
Correct.
No video of the girl.
Correct.
No forensic reports on the girl.
Correct.
No medical records of the girl.
Correct.
No specific day this happened.
Correct.
No specific date it happened. You have no day, you have no month, right? No day of the week, no month. Specifically. Physical evidence. I'm talking physical evidence.
Physical evidence, no.
You have no physical proof that that shooting ever happened.
It's all testimony.
You have no physical proof the shooting ever happened, correct?
Again, it's all testimonial.
Okay, I'm asking you a yes or no question. You have no physical proof that any shooting of any little girl ever happened, yes or no?
Yes.
Now, let's talk about this alleged shooting of an old man. Familiar with that
Yes.
charge? You have no photos of that, right?
Correct.
No video of that, right?
Correct.
No hospital records?
No.
No medical records?
No.
No forensic reports?
No.
No physical proof that it ever happened?
Again, that's correct.
We've covered the physical aspect of this. Now I want to get into the interview, testimonial aspect of the case. So you've acknowledged physical evidence was unavailable to you, certain scientific evidence was unavailable to you, but you still want to do a thorough and complete job of investigating this case, right?
Correct.
You want to get to the truth. What you had available to you, as I think you just said, is the testimony, right? The words that come out of people's mouths when you interviewed them at NCIS or elsewhere, right?
Correct.
Now, agree with me that interviews became an important part of this case,
Agreed.
an important part of your work.
Agreed.
And I'm going to just throw out some names, some people you interviewed in the case, right? You interviewed Chief Miller, right?
Yes.
Dylan DeLay, Mr. DeLay.
Yes.
You interviewed SO1 Vreens and SO1 Villanueva and SO1 Byrne, right?
SO2 Villanueva, but yes.
Sorry, SO2 Villanueva. And you videotaped some of these interviews, right?
Yes.
Now, just so we can paint a picture in the minds of the members, I want to talk a little bit about those videotaped interviews you did of the witnesses.
Okay.
The videotaped interviews were conducted at NCIS, right?
Correct.
And help me out here, because I haven't been there, but it's sort of a little conference room, right?
Basically.
It's a windowless room, if I could tell.
That's correct.
And you would bring the witnesses that I mentioned and others into the interview room, right?
Correct.
And there was a camera,
That's
right?
correct.
And there was a audio recorder, correct?
Correct.
And you would sit down at a table and interview these witnesses.
Correct.
And sometimes there was another agent there with you, right?
That's correct.
Sometimes not, I think.
That's correct.
One of the guys that worked on the case with you was named Seth Goodwin, a special agent, right?
That's correct.
Seth Goodwin has a particular interview style, right?
Correct.
And you have a particular interview style, correct?
Correct.
And sometimes your interview style and his interview style were not the same. Agreed?
Yes.
Now, the reason you videotaped some of the interviews was to get a perfect memorial or a perfect recording of what you said to the witness and what the witness said to you, right?
Yes.
And you didn't videotape all the interviews you did of all the witnesses, right?
That's correct.
correct me if I'm wrong here, but you brought in a bunch of witnesses in April and May of 2018. Remember that?
Correct.
And you put most of them, I think, on video. There's one exception, but you put most of them on video, right?
I don't know which one you're talking about as the exception.
You never put SO Tolbert on video.
That was conducted by the Norfolk field office. I was not the one who conducted that interview. And that was,
So I'm right. You never put SO Tolbert on video,
yes, that's correct.
right? And this was in April and May of 2018, right?
Correct.
You did follow-up interviews later on, 2018, 2019, with the witnesses, right?
Correct.
And the follow-up interviews, you did not videotape, correct?
That's correct.
So just by way of example, the first person you interviewed in the case was Chief Miller, right?
Correct.
And Chief Miller, you put on videotape April 10, 2018.
That's correct.
You had subsequent, later interviews with Chief Miller, right?
Correct.
You did not put those on videotape,
That's correct.
right? And you sort of followed the same pattern with the other witnesses. First interview on videotape, later interviews not on videotape.
That's correct.
And when you videotaped an interview, there was a transcript, right?
Correct.
Transcript that was created. And in addition to the transcript, which is the words that you said to the witness and the witness said to you, you also wrote up a report that summarized the interview.
Correct.
Now, can we call that the ROI, or the report of interview, or the report
Investigative action is what it's called.
Okay, I'm going to call it a report. How about that?
That's,
Now, if we wanted to know what was said in any of your interviews that were videotaped, we could use the transcript, correct?
correct.
And if we wanted to know what you said in the follow-up interviews, the best we have is your report, right?
Correct.
Now, when a witness came in to be interviewed, you put them down at the table and you turned on the camera and you started asking questions, right?
Correct.
But you had conversations with the witnesses off camera, right?
Yes, it did.
You also had a period of conversation that was muted out, correct? It was covered with white noise, right?
I don't know what you're referring to with that.
Okay, did you cause any part of those videotaped interviews to be muted out with white noise?
No.
You sure about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if I got one of those videotapes and put it up here, and you started asking questions to somebody and it was muted out with white noise,
I have nothing to do with that.
you weren't responding, you don't know anything about that?
I'm guessing what you're talking about now is redactions when there's PII.
Yeah, I'm not asking you to guess, I'm just asking you what you know.
Okay, then I know no part in that.
But you did ask the witnesses questions off camera, right?
That's correct.
And when you took breaks, you asked them questions, right?
That's correct.
And after they left, you asked them questions, right?
That's correct.
And if it was off camera, we don't know what you said,
That's correct.
unless perhaps it was caught on the audio tape.
That's
right?
correct.
Now, your first interview in the case, I think you said was Chief Miller.
That's correct.
April 10, 2018. You got this case referred to you on April 6, 2018, right?
No.
When did you get it referred to you?
April 9th. It was
Okay.
referred to NCIS on the 6th, which was late on a Friday.
And you got it Monday morning, April 9th.
Correct.
Okay. So you had the case for like less than 24 hours when you started interviewing Chief Miller.
Correct. Just over 24 hours.
And you were conducting a criminal investigation,
Correct.
correct? That's not what you told Chief Miller. You told Chief Miller that you were putting him in as a source number, right?
Yes,
You told him the data from the investigation, from the interview, would go under a source file, right?
that was our intention at the time.
Okay, I'm just asking you what you told him.
Yes,
You didn't tell him it was going to go into a criminal case file, right?
I did.
In fact, you told him that it was not going to go in a case file, right?
I was talking about his name. Our original intention was that put all of his information under a source number
You were
to
going to put him,
protect his name, and
you
that
were
his
going to,
name
and you told him,
would not.
exactly. And you
go
told him that his name would be protected, right?
That's correct.
Correct? That's what a source file is. And you told him it's not like anyone can look at this. It's not like anyone can get access to this, right?
That's correct.
And you told him that so that he could go to town on Eddie Gallagher, right?
No, I told him
He
that
could
because
feel that he could say whatever he wanted and nobody would ever find out because he would be a source, not a criminal witness. Is that right?
no,
You didn't tell him that the information that he was going to give you would be used to build a criminal case, correct? Because I can get the videotape and we can play it right here.
I told him that it
He
was
would be a
going
source
to
file.
be under a source, and that is exactly what we had intended to do, and that it was part of a criminal investigation. It was clear that it was a criminal investigation.
It was clear to you, but you told Chief Miller he was going to be a source and nobody would ever find out his name. Did you say those words, yes or no?
I don't think it was those exact words, but he
Okay,
was
so
told that
let's
he would
go
be.
to the exact words,
Okay,
all right? You recall telling Chief Miller, you're putting him in as a source number. The data will go under a source file. It won't go into a case file. It's not like they could look at this recording or anything like that. Did you say those words, yes or no?
yes,
Miller ended up as a witness in a criminal investigation, correct?
yes,
So, withdrawn. You weren't wearing an intelligence gathering hat when you were interviewing Miller, right?
no,
Sometimes when you wear an intelligence gathering hat, you put information into a source file and it stays confidential, right?
correct,
And in a criminal case, when a witness gives an interview, it can become public, right?
we use sources
Correct.
in the exact same way in criminal cases and in
Miller was
intelligence.
not a confidential source to you, correct? He was a witness, am I right?
Originally, he was going to be put under as a confidential source, and that's what
And you
my,
let him believe that he was going to be a confidential source, right? Not a criminal witness.
that was the decision that was made by my office, and that's how we tried to
Okay,
start this as.
you're the lead case agent, and you're responsible for this case, right?
That's correct.
Now, April 10th, the day that you told Craig Miller, Chief Miller, that he would remain a source and not a criminal witness, you'd had the case for, as you said, 20-something hours, and you knew very little about the facts. Is that right?
That's correct.
You hadn't interviewed anybody. He was the first guy.
That's correct.
And at that point in the investigation, on April 10th, you didn't even know the names of the guys in the platoon, right?
Correct.
You had no proof, no evidence of what anybody in the platoon did in Iraq or didn't do in Iraq, right?
Correct.
But you already had your take on the investigation. You already had your take on it, right?
No.
No. You did not have your take on the investigation right off the bat.
That's correct.
Okay. You recall telling Chief Miller you had your take on the investigation already, as soon as Miller sat down.
I don't recall saying those words, but
Okay, let me see if I can refresh your recollection. Permission to approach, Judge?
You may.
I'm showing you what's been marked as page 3315. And I'm directing your attention to the second line. Just read it to yourself and look up at me when you're finished. Thank you. And let me ask you again, did you or did you not tell Chief Miller The first interview, on the first day of the case, you already had your take on the investigation.
I stand corrected. I did.
You already had your take on the investigation, even though you had no proof. Right?
I think it was likely said in
I'm not
a,
asking you what you think. I'm asking you to please answer my questions, and I'm trying to be polite. You told Chief Miller you already had your take on this investigation, even though you had no proof in your possession. Right? That's what you said.
that's what I said, yes.
In your mind, you'd given Chief Miller a free pass.
No,
You didn't know what happened in Iraq, right?
correct.
You didn't know what kind of agenda Chief Miller might have had. You didn't know anything. But in your mind, you'd given him a free pass. Yes or no?
I don't know what you mean by free pass.
Well, you jumped to the conclusion that Chief Miller had done nothing wrong. You had no evidence in the case, but you jumped to the conclusion right away in the first interview on the first day with no proof that Chief Miller had done nothing wrong. Didn't you jump to that conclusion?
I had nothing to indicate he had done anything wrong.
Okay. You told him, don't worry, man. You've done nothing wrong, right?
I believe I said something similar to that.
And you told him that even though you didn't have a shred of proof of what happened in Iraq, right?
That's correct.
In your mind, sitting in front of Chief Miller, tell him he's done nothing wrong and that you already have your take on the investigation. You're going after one guy here and one guy only. Am I right about that?
No,
You're going after Eddie Gallagher, right?
no,
It's not a search for the truth here. You're giving the first witness a pat on the back and telling him he's done nothing wrong when you knew nothing about what happened. That's what you told him.
that's what I told him.
Now, you know what 31 Bravo warnings are, right?
Correct.
And the civilian analog, Miranda rights, correct?
Correct.
And 31B warnings are required when you question anyone who's suspected of a possible crime, right?
Correct.
And without testing Chief Miller's story, without any independent evidence, you told Chief Miller, I'm not going to read you your 31 Bravo rights. You're not suspected of doing anything wrong. Isn't that what you told him?
Because I told him I had no information indicating he'd done anything wrong at that point.
You gave him a free pass in the first interview, right? With no information.
Asked and answered.
Overruled. Counsel, it is about the time that I'd like to take a break. I don't want to interrupt your flow, but if they find a natural stopping point, I'd like to take just a short recess. So up to you.
Let me take 3 minutes if it pleases the court.
By all means.
Thank you. Special Agent Warpinski, with no evidence, no proof, no other interviews, you determined in your mind, I'm not testing Chief Miller's story. I'm not going to read him his 31 Bravo rights. He's not a suspect. Essentially, he's got immunity. That's what you told him in the first interview.
No,
Well, you said to Chief Miller, did you not? I'm not reading you 31 Bravo. You're 100% here as a witness. You say those words?
yes, that's correct.
Now, you did not know what Chief Miller had done in Iraq, what Chief Miller's agenda was, whether Chief Miller was lying to you, whether Chief Miller was in a conspiracy to frame Eddie Gallagher. You didn't know any of that at that point, right?
No,
And you told him, fine, whatever you say, you're a witness, don't worry about it.
I had nothing that said that he was doing any of those things.
And
So I
once
had
you decided
nothing
not to
that
read him
would
31 Bravo,
require
you couldn't.
31 Bravo.
I'm sorry. Once you decided not to read him 31 Bravo, you couldn't prosecute him for any of that stuff, right? Any of the things you asked him about.
That's not correct.
Okay. You told him, you're here as a witness. right?
That's correct.
And you had no idea about what his agenda was, correct?
Correct.
You had no idea whether he was lying to you or not, right?
Correct.
You had no idea whether or not he wanted to frame Eddie Gallagher, right?
Correct.
But you told him, don't worry, you're just here as a witness. Did you say those words or no?
Yes, I told him he was here as a witness.
Good breaking point, Judge.
All right. Members, let's just take a short recess. If you'd be back in the deliberation room at 1:15, I would. Members, we continue with the examination of Special Agent Warpinski. Defense, you may proceed.
So before we took a break, Special Agent Warpinski, we're talking about this is the first interview of a death investigation. You're 20-something hours in, you have no facts, and you told Chief Miller he's got nothing to worry about, right?
I told him he was there as a witness.
You also told him he had nothing to worry about.
I told him I wasn't reading 31 Bravo because I had nothing to suspect him of.
I'm happy to go back to that document that I just showed you and refresh your recollection again about how you told him he had nothing to worry about. Do you want me to do that again?
I don't remember saying those exact words, but
Okay. Do you think the transcript's wrong?
no.
Okay. Now, telling an agent, I'm sorry, withdrawn. Telling the first witness in the first interview in a death investigation that he's got nothing to worry about, isn't that just awful practice?
I wouldn't say that.
I asked you a little earlier about the possibility that Chief Miller was pursuing an agenda that you had no clue about when you told him, you got nothing to worry about, you're just a witness, right? In fact, you learned later that Chief Miller did have an agenda, didn't you?
I don't know if I'd call it
Let
an
me
agenda.
break it down. You understood that the allegations in this case were made by SEALs who told you they were disgruntled with Chief Gallagher, right?
They were unhappy. I don't know if anyone used the word disgruntled.
Well, unhappy that he took them out of the fight, correct?
I'm trying to remember.
If you can't remember, I'm pretty sure you testified at the Article 32 hearing in this case, and I'm pretty sure I have the exact questions and answers that you gave when you were questioned under oath at that hearing. So let me pose my question again. SEALs that made the allegations in this case were disgruntled with Chief Gallagher, yes or no?
They were unhappy with him. Disgruntled might have used that word as well.
And they were unhappy or disgruntled that he took them out of the fight, right?
So my pause was I'm trying to remember any of the ones who were actually taken out of the fight. I know it was a threat to them.
Can you show me page 5300? May I approach, Judge?
You may.
I'm actually just going to show you my copy. Take a second and read base 5300 down to the bottom, if you don't mind. And then just look up when you're finished, please. And I'll ask you yet again, these SEALs who made the allegations were upset with Chief Gallagher because he took them out of the fight, yes or no?
Yes, I don't remember exactly which ones said they were benched, but I know that that was a concern.
Fair enough. And they were angry about that, right?
Yes,
And they talked to you during your interviews about Chief Gallagher going home on the first flight out from the platoon deployment, right?
that's correct.
And they were angry about that.
They were.
Objection, hearsay.
Response?
I'm not asking him, Judge, about the truth of the matters they asserted. I'm asking him what he was told and how it affected his investigation.
All right. I'll overrule the objection, but members, this testimony is not being offered for the truth of the matters asserted in the statements. It's merely being offered to show this witness's process in pursuing the investigation. You may proceed.
Thank you. You were told that they were angry that Chief Gallagher was getting put in for a Silver Star, right?
Correct.
That was one of their frustrations, right?
Correct.
And the SEAL witnesses who were upset or angry or disgruntled in this case were angry that Chief Gallagher was going to be an instructor at SELC, correct?
Correct.
You learned all of this stuff, or you were told all of this stuff during the course of your investigation, right?
Correct.
In the first interview on the first day when you had no proof and you knew nothing, and you told Chief Miller, he's simply here as a witness. You didn't know any of that stuff yet, right?
Correct.
Now, before I move off your giving a free pass to Chief Miller, I am going to ask you the following question. You interviewed Miller thereafter multiple times, after that first day sort of ignorant interview, right?
After that first interview, we interviewed him multiple
When you knew
times.
nothing about the case, but
Correct.
gave him a free pass. Now, in all your investigations of Chief Craig Miller, he never said to you, and I promise Kelly Wilson, who is the most organized, best lawyer on this team, and who has everything that we need right here at your disposal, in any of the investigations that any of the interviews you did of Chief Miller, he never said to you in any communication that the stabbing in this case, if it happened, was in the jugular vein. That's not in any report of yours, correct?
I don't recall. I don't recall putting it as jugular vein. I think it was
Those
something.
words, he never used those words.
I
We can
don't-
take time and you can look through every report.
I don't recall him saying specifically the jugular vein.
Here's one that I think will ring a bell. In any of the interviews that you did with Chief Miller, did he ever tell you that blood flowed out of the ISIS terrorists like baby vomit?
Yes.
Oh, do you have that documented in one of your reports?
It was
Or was that one of your communications that you didn't document?
it was pulsating out, and it was a conversation when he met with one of the experts in the case.
Baby vomit? Really?
I don't remember it being
Really?
exact that way, that it was
I'm
pulsating
not
out.
asking you what he did say. I'm asking you what he never told you. He never said baby vomit.
I don't recall baby vomit.
Now, your second interview, and we're going to come back to Chief Miller, your second interview in this case was of then SO1 Dylan DeLay, now Mr. Dylan DeLay, right?
That's correct.
And that was on April 11th, 2018.
Correct.
And you had been investigating this matter at the time you interviewed Dylan DeLay for a grand total of
Just over 48 hours.
2 days, right?
Correct.
And essentially, you didn't know Dylan DeLay from a hole in the wall, right?
Correct.
And he also was one of these disgruntled SEALs that we talked about earlier, right?
He was unhappy with Chief Gallagher, yes.
Yes. And at the time you sat down with Dylan DeLay, for all you knew, he could have killed the terrorists. You didn't know, right?
I didn't know. All I had was
Exactly.
Craig Miller's statement at that point.
And without knowing anything about Miller's actions, other than what he told you, and DeLay's actions, you told Dylan DeLay that your view of the case was black and white. Right?
I believe I said that.
This is the investigation of a death. You've been on it for barely 48 hours. You've interviewed one guy, and your view of the case is black and white.
It was an expression. It was to trying to build rapport with him.
You also told Dylan DeLay, when you were trying to build rapport with him, that if everyone's saying it went down the way, if it went down the way everyone's saying it went down, it's a bad thing, right?
I believe I said something similar to that.
Now, when you said to DeLay, if this went down the way everybody's saying it is a bad thing, you were lying.
What do you mean?
You don't
In
know
what
what
way?
you don't know what I mean by lying?
I know what you mean by lying, but what do you mean I'd be lying?
You said to Dylan DeLay, if this is going down the way everyone's saying it's went down, it's a bad thing. You only interviewed one guy. What do you mean the way everybody's saying it's going down?
I see what you're saying.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
That's a lie.
Yes.
You lied to him.
Of course. I'm not going to tell him how many people I've talked to.
But you made him think that you had talked to a lot of people and they were all saying this was a terrible thing. And that was false.
That's correct.
And you were influencing how DeLay would answer your questions by telling him what everybody else was saying. That's not good practice.
It wasn't my intention, and I didn't tell him what other people were telling me.
I'm not asking you about your intention. I'm asking you whether or not it's good practice to tell a witness what everybody else is saying about the case.
I didn't
Is
tell
that good practice?
I didn't tell him what everybody else was saying about the case.
You told him that multiple people, if everybody, all these multiple people were right, this is really bad. You hadn't even spoken to multiple people,
That's
right?
right.
And you said that to him because you wanted him to get on board the Screw Eddie Gallagher train,
No.
right?
No.
Multiple people didn't exist. Multiple people didn't say anything about this case. One guy had been interviewed, and you're trying to get Dylan DeLay to jump on board the train.
That's not what the intention was.
So when you told them that this is black and white, you wanted to tell them you had a closed case. You were done.
No.
Game over. Multiple people are saying that this is how it happened. So you know what? On day 2 into the investigation, we're done. Jump on the train. Come on board. That's what you're telling Dylan DeLay.
That's not what I was intending to tell Dylan DeLay.
That may not have been what you were intending to tell him, but that's what you told him, right? And he only knows what he hears. Now, you're calling the case black and white on the second day with no physical evidence, right?
Correct.
None. Zero. I'm not even sure you had photographs of what happened at the time, right?
We didn't.
And we talked about 31 Bravo earlier. You knew nothing, I think I just said, about Dylan DeLay and what he had done and what he had done in Iraq and what his agenda was, right?
Correct.
But you told him you weren't going to read him 31 Bravo rights either, and that he did nothing wrong. You told him that, didn't you?
That's exactly why I wouldn't read him 31 Bravo, is because I had no suspicion at that point of him doing something wrong.
You had no knowledge of whether or not he'd done anything wrong, correct?
Which is the same. There's absolutely...
You had no knowledge of whether or not he'd done anything wrong, right?
That's why 31 Bravo was not necessary.
And if you don't read him 31 Bravo, or an officer doesn't read him 31 Bravo, he can't be charged with a crime based on his own statements, right?
That's not correct.
Okay, why don't you tell me your understanding of 31 Bravo? He can't be, his own words can't be used against him if he's not given warnings.
31 Bravo, which is like Miranda. It's
Focus on me for a second. I know that at Fletzy, in the fake courtroom, they tell you, don't look at the defense lawyer, and look
Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
withdrawn. Let's focus on my question.
Okay.
His own statements can't be used against him.
That's incorrect.
Go ahead.
31 Bravo is you're warning to a military member who is suspected of a crime. When these individuals come in as witnesses, just like any witness in any case, if we suspect them of committing any criminal offenses, we read them 31 Bravo.
Thank you.
Which is
Now-
like Miranda.
Mr.
But-
Miss Special Agent Warpinski, you didn't know a darn thing about what Dylan DeLay had done in Iraq, correct?
Correct? That's why
And you didn't know a darn thing about what his agenda was at the time he sat down with you, correct? Yes or no?
no.
Okay.
That's why 30.
Now, you actually told him, after you decided not to read him 31 Bravo, that nobody in the platoon photograph, and you're familiar with the platoon photograph?
Yes.
You told him nobody in the platoon photograph had done anything wrong. Right?
That's correct.
That platoon photograph, the one with the terrorist in it, right? You told DeLay nobody in the photograph had done anything wrong, right?
I believe I said that.
And yet, here sits Chief Gallagher. He was in the platoon photograph, right?
That's correct.
So he's done nothing wrong, right? Nobody in the photograph had done anything wrong. Those are your words.
That's not how I intended it. It's
Okay, I understand that. Now, you told us it's withdrawn. Before I get off Dylan DeLay in this second interview, off camera, before you put him on the video, did you tell him you built a slam dunk case? Think about those words before you answer this question. Slam dunk case. Did you say that, yes or no?
I don't recall.
You have no memory of that.
I know I talked to him. I don't
You definitely talked to him off camera, we can agree on that.
agree.
And you told him you built a slam dunk case
I think we were saying we were going to try to build a slam dunk case,
on the
but
second day.
that we would
right?
try to. I don't believe.
Now, you also interviewed DeLay multiple times after that first video interview.
That's correct.
And you texted him multiple times.
Correct.
I think, but I'm not sure, you talked on the telephone with him multiple times, right? In terms of the reports that you wrote about your contacts with Mr. DeLay, you never documented anywhere that he said anything about seeing a vapor trail from Chief Gallagher's rifle. Correct?
I don't remember that.
Do you want me to show you every report and we can do a quick search for the words vapor trail?
No, I don't believe I said it or documented it.
Thank you. So that's Miller and DeLay, and I want to talk a little bit more about some of these videotaped interviews. You videoed SO2 Villanueva,
Correct.
SO1 Vreens,
Correct.
Lieutenant McNeil,
Correct.
among others.
Yes.
And in every video interview that I just mentioned, you made super crystal clear to the witness that you were going after Eddie Gallagher.
Made it clear that was the focus of the investigation.
You made it clear you were focusing in on one guy, right?
Yes.
You didn't tell Villanueva, for example, you're there to investigate a death, right?
Not in those exact words.
You didn't tell Villanueva, I'm just here to be a fair finder of the facts, right?
I told him I was there to figure out what happened.
Actually, what you said to him was, all right, man, obviously we want to talk to you about Eddie Gallagher, right? lasered in on Eddie Gallagher at the beginning of the interview.
That's correct.
And with respect to SO1 Vreens, you didn't say to Vreens, I'm an impartial, unbiased, NCIS manual following unbiased investigator. You said to Vreens, what do you think this is about? My chief, Eddie Gallagher? Right. That's not letting the witness tell you everything that happened, is it?
Afterwards, we did.
That's telling the witness, I am here to target one guy. Wrong?
We made it clear that it was about Chief Gallagher.
Right. Not finding the facts. Not keeping an open mind.
It was finding the
Finding-
facts about Chief Gallagher.
Okay, that's not what you said. And Lieutenant McNeil, he was in for an interview with you, I think in May of 2018.
That's correct.
And you didn't tell him you were there to investigate an incident or look into a death or find out what happened on the Mosul deployment. You targeted Chief Gallagher. Again. You asked Lieutenant McNeil, you know, what are we doing here? And he said, I would probably guess this might be about Gallagher. And you said to him, that's absolutely right. You didn't say to him, I'm not focusing on one guy, I'm focusing on what happened. I don't know enough yet to focus on one person. I'm focused on the truth. But by telling the witnesses that you were there to focus on one guy, what do you think they're going to do? Focus on one guy?
It's possible.
Not a great way to pursue an impartial investigation in retrospect, right?
Not the best questions.
Not the best questions. Now, I think I asked you earlier, after these videotaped interviews, you would write up reports. I'm sorry if I'm blocking them. You would write up reports about the interview.
Correct.
On, April 3rd, or April 10th, I interviewed Joe Blow, and he said this. But you also had the videotaped transcripts, right?
Correct.
So one is the videotaped transcript of the words that were said, and then there's a report, which is your take, or your after-the-fact characterization of what was said, right?
Correct.
So I want to take a look at some of that and whether or not you were fair and accurate, as you said a good investigator should be. Now, when you write up reports, you want to be truthful, correct?
Yes.
You want to be accurate, right?
Yes.
True to what the witness said?
Yes.
And you wouldn't want to twist what the witness said to hurt Chief Gallagher.
Correct.
You interviewed SO1 Arrington on May 7th, right?
Correct.
On videotape?
Yes.
And there was discussion about a possible concern with regard to the terrorist's death, that the whole day might have been caught on camera. Remember that?
I don't remember that particular part.
Okay, can I see dates? Actually, the transcript, 5/7/18, 29/32. May I approach, Judge?
You may.
I'm sorry, Mr. McKinsey, if I could.
I'm sorry.
I'll have a hearsay objection to this portion.
Well,
Your Honor.
he's just refreshing his recollection,
At
so
this point. May I approach?
you may.
Take a look, we can probably get the prior page for you, but the only question pending, and don't answer it until you look at that, is there was a discussion that day about what happened, whether or not there might have been cameras in the area.
Objection calls for hearsay.
Again, we're just refreshing recollection, so objection overruled.
Could you get the prior page, just to, a little context for this? Hand it back, just help out.
You want 14? And if it helps the witness, I can show you the ROI, the report of the day, just to refresh your recollection.
I believe I know what it's referencing, but the actual transcript's best for this.
Apologize, Judge. Yeah.
Thank you.
And again, I'm just asking whether it refreshes your recollection that you and the witness discussed the topic of cameras in the area. Does that refresh your recollection?
Yes.
Now, SO1 Arrington told you, not for the truth, what he told you, that if the goings-on that day had been on the internet or caught on a camera, it might show Navy SEALs doing fucked up shit, and it would be bad for the community. He told you that, right?
That's what the discussion was.
And the re-enlistment ceremony certainly was something that happened that day, right?
Correct?
As far as you're told.
Correct.
But although Arrington told you that cameras might have caught Navy SEALs doing fucked up shit, that's not what you wrote in your report. When you wrote your report of that interview, you twisted it to screw Eddie Gallagher.
May I see that again real quick, just to...
Absolutely. And if it'll help, I'll show you your report as well.
Absolutely.
Here's your report. Like pink. Sorry. I showed BS 129. May I take this back? Arrington told you that a camera might have caught Navy SEALs doing fucked up shit. That's not what you wrote in your report. Am I right?
The way I read it is that Arrington was saying that
I'm just asking what you wrote in your report, not what Arrington was. What you wrote in your report.
my report says that if it had been leaked,
Your report said, had the actions of Chief Gallagher been caught on camera, it would be bad for the SEAL community. That's not what Arrington said on video.
that's correct.
Arrington said, well, the Navy SEALs were doing fucked up shit, and your report says Chief Gallagher might have been bad for the community. Correct?
Correct.
Thank you. In the course of your work on this case, you swore out some search warrants, right?
Correct.
And a search warrant is an affidavit, right?
Correct.
And it's an affidavit that lays out facts, correct?
Correct.
And it's an affidavit that lays out facts, usually for a judge or an authority to give you permission to do something,
Correct.
right? And in the case that I'd like to talk about, you swore out a search warrant to search the Gallagher home,
That's correct.
right? And you wrote down a bunch of facts, and you have to get a search warrant, you have to go to a United States federal judge, right?
Correct.
And that's not somebody who's located on this base, right?
Correct.
This is a judge appointed by the President of the United States, right?
Correct.
And the reason you have to go to a judge appointed by the President of the United States to get a search warrant is because it's a pretty personal thing to go through somebody's house, right?
Absolutely.
It's pretty invasive.
Agreed.
And so the law requires you to essentially lay out facts that allow the judge to say, okay, you can do it, right?
Yes.
And to get a search warrant, the judge wants to make sure that what you're saying is true, right?
Correct.
Because the judge doesn't want to let you into somebody's house where their wife is and their kids are and their pets are and their personal items are unless, you're telling them the truth, right?
Correct.
And there's no fudging in a search warrant when you swear to it.
Correct.
There's no embellishing, right?
Correct.
There's no manipulating.
Correct.
Now, when you wanted to go into Chief Gallagher's home and get a search warrant, you told the federal judge about your interview of Chief Miller, right?
It was discussed in the affidavit.
Right. In fact, it was discussed at paragraph 7, if you don't remember. And you told Chief Miller that you told the federal judge that you interviewed Chief Miller on April 10th. And that's the video interview we talked about, right?
That's correct.
And we have a transcript of what you said to him and what he said to you and Miller.
That's correct.
Right? And you talked about that interview in the affidavit you submitted to get the search warrant for the chief's house.
Correct.
And you swore to the federal judge that Miller said he saw Chief Gallagher stab the ISIS terrorist, causing his death. You swore to that, right?
That's correct.
But you never asked Chief Miller on that video what the cause of the death was, Special Agent Warpinski. Isn't that right?
I don't
You
recall.
never asked him.
I don't recall whether or not I did specifically in that.
And Chief Miller never said to you on that video, which I'm in possession of, Chief Miller never said to you what the cause of death was. right? I have a transcript of that interview.
I believe at some point he did.
I'm not asking you what you believe. I'm asking you what happened.
I can't tell you 100% that he did or didn't right now.
You
without
never
reviewing
asked
the
him
full
cause of
transcript.
death. He never told you cause of death, and you swore to a federal judge that he said the stabbing caused the death. Right?
The way I recalled it is that,
I'm not asking you the way you recall it. I'm asking you what happened.
well, then I can't answer that question then. Without
Do you want me
taking a
to
look at
show
the
you the
transcript.
search warrant?
Full transcript of Miller's would be best.
Okay, we can take care of that. That search warrant was under penalty of perjury.
Correct.
And you understand it's a crime to lie to a federal judge?
Yes.
And you used the same lie about Miller supposedly telling you something about cause of death to swear out a bunch of search warrants in this case, didn't you?
I'm not saying it's a lie.
Okay, you used that same statement to swear out a bunch of search warrants. Do you want me to give you the transcript right now?
Please.
Judge, this could take a few minutes. We can come back to it. We can do it at a break, whatever you like.
If you'd like to refresh his recollection, you're welcome to. That's the process.
Can I have maybe a 180-second break, Your Honor?
Yes, members, why don't we we'll just go ahead and take our 10-minute recess now. If you'd be back in the deliberation room at 5 after the hour.
All right.
Members, we continue with the examination of Special Agent Warpinski. Mr. may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Special Agent Warpinski, over the break, did you have an opportunity to review the transcript of your interview with Chief Miller on April 10, 2018? That's date stamped 3313 through 3356.
Yes.
And during the course of that interview, in reviewing what you said to him and what he said to you, you never asked him what caused the death, correct?
Correct.
And he never told you what caused the death, correct? He never said a stabbing wound caused the death to you, right?
That directly, no.
Yet you told a federal judge in San Diego that that's what Miller said, and that was wrong, right?
No.
You just told us you never asked him, and Miller never said that. So whatever you told that federal judge was some manipulation of what Miller told you, correct?
It was my understanding of what Miller told.
Okay. When you raise your hand and you swear to tell the truth, are you supposed to tell the true facts, or are you supposed to tell kind of the way you might understand it? Which one?
I still believe
Which one?
that it
Just
is.
tell me which one.
It's the absolute facts.
The absolute facts. Thank you. Now, on the heels of that search warrant, where you inserted your interpretation instead of the facts, a federal judge issued a search warrant for Chief Gallagher's house on Belknap Way, correct?
Correct.
And you, as the case agent, were the person who oversaw the warrant execution. Is that right?
There were
I
three
know
different.
you're going to tell me there's a tactical team and they do a tac plan, right? That's what you're going at?
No.
Okay. Who oversaw the execution of the search warrant?
Brian Frank.
Okay. And what were you doing that day?
I met with Chief Gallagher at his at NSW, the Naval Special Warfare,
Yeah.
in an attempt to interview him.
Now, you're aware of the execution of the search warrant and how it went down?
That's correct.
And you're aware that agents in full tactical gear went in to the house, right?
I think your use of tactical gear is inappropriate.
Do you want me to get what you said at the Article 32 hearing? Because I'm happy to do that. We could take another 10-minute break. I'll pull out the transcript, it'll say what you were asked under oath, and we can quibble about tactical gear. Were they wearing tactical gear or not?
They were wearing body armor.
Oh, my bad.
They were wearing
Sorry.
body armor, which identifies them as police.
Okay.
We made the specific decision not to send a tactical team, like a
Okay.
SWAT team, to conduct this
You
search warrant.
decided to go easy, right, and just M4 weapons drawn, pistols drawn? That's the decision you made?
It's what we do with every search warrant.
Okay. Even search warrants involving little kids
Yes.
and little kids in their underwear?
Objection, hearsay, and relevance.
Overruled.
Absolutely.
Okay. Standard operating procedure, according to you, because you know that I know the manual. Standard operating procedure is M4s, pistols, kids out of the house, in their underwear, with no parents home. That's standard operating procedure? Is that your testimony?
We weren't attempting to do this with no parents home. We didn't know that Chief Gallagher's wife was not home.
Just a quick question. I'm walking, just for the record, to the edge of the gallery. Are you familiar with this gentleman right here in the blue suit?
Objection, relevance.
Members, would you just give us a few minutes?
All right.
Everyone, please be seated. Relevance defense.
I'll tell you where I was going, but it's one question and I can pass it up. My understanding is that the possibility is an NCIS supervisor. And I'm just going to ask if perhaps the supervisor were here in the courtroom, because he's talking about what's policy and procedure. I'm agnostic about pursuing it, to be honest.
No, I'll overrule the objection. You may ask. We ready to recall the members, government?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Everyone, please be seated. Members, I overruled the objection. Defense, you may proceed.
Do you know that person?
I actually do not know.
You know whether he works for NCIS?
I believe he does. I do not know him, though.
You know in what position?
I do not know.
I want to go back to the search warrant. At the time that the team invaded Chief Gallagher's house, you knew that Mrs. Gallagher wouldn't be there, right?
That's not correct.
Well, a phone call was placed to Mrs. Gallagher, wasn't it?
That's correct.
And she wasn't at home, right?
She didn't answer her phone.
Uh-huh. And did you call the house phone?
Do not know if we had a house phone number.
Okay. So you just disregarded a telephone call to the house?
I don't know. I wasn't there on the scene.
So,
I know that multiple attempts were made to call Chief
Now-
Gallagher's wife.
did you, back at NCIS, have knowledge that Mrs. Gallagher wasn't home at the time of the execution of the warrant?
No.
Did you have any conversation with anybody at NCIS who might have told you, my wife is not home at the present time?
No. Not when the execution search warrant happened.
Before or after?
It was after.
During the search warrant execution, I know you said there was a female, I think I've read that there was a female agent there, correct?
That's correct. Multiple.
And everybody who went in had guns drawn, right?
No.
No. Who had their pistols drawn?
I don't know
Who
exactly.
had the M4s drawn?
Objection, no personal knowledge. This witness has testified he wasn't present.
I can move on, Judge.
All right. Then sustained. Go
Let's
ahead.
stay on the search warrant. NCIS seized various devices, electronic devices from the home pursuant to the search warrant, right?
Correct.
And one of the items withdrawn. You took the items, or caused the items, to get to an NCIS computer specialist person, right?
Correct.
That's Heather Hatcher.
Correct.
Now, NCIS seized an iPad that belonged to Mrs. Gallagher, right?
I believe that was one of the items.
Okay, and a GoPro camera that was used by Chief Gallagher's son,
That's correct.
and an iPod Touch device that had the name of one of Chief Gallagher's children on it, right?
That's correct.
And the agents in tactical gear with weapons took this iPod Touch, right?
Not directly from them, but yes.
They took it, right? And they took all the electronics in the house, correct?
That's incorrect.
They took computers,
They did.
iPads,
Correct.
they took phones,
Correct.
and when you gave these items to this computer specialist, Heather Hatcher, you asked her to do all sorts of whiz-bang stuff with it, right? Turn it on, power it up, try to download what's in it, analyze it, decode it, right? Get information from it, extract from it. You did all that stuff, right?
Correct.
And you ran tests on them, and you actually were able to obtain Chief Gallagher's iPhone password, right?
That's correct.
And you did that by looking over his shoulder.
Objection, relevance.
Relevance.
Goes to the integrity of the investigation and this agent's credibility.
Overruled. Go ahead.
You were able to get Chief Gallagher's iPhone password by looking over his shoulder.
I was standing right next to him.
Oh, you were standing next to him. He didn't give you the password out of his mouth, did he?
No.
You kind of like
Yeah,
snatched it, right?
that's correct.
Now, you have the password, which you snatch away from him. You have all the items that you get from the house. You run all sorts of tests on them. Did you ever bother to run any tests on SO1 Vreens' phones?
We attempted to, but we didn't. His cell phone, his personal cell phone, no.
You did not. You didn't get a search warrant for it. You didn't get a subpoena for it. You didn't run any decoding, extraction programs on it, right?
No.
Corey Scott's phone?
No.
Chief Miller's phone?
No.
You don't know what they had on their phones
Correct.
from your analysis, right?
Correct.
You don't know what they deleted from their phones from your analysis, correct?
That's correct.
You never bothered to get that evidence. Dylan DeLay's phone,
That's correct.
and yet you have the iPod Touch of a little kid who runs out of her house in her underwear, right?
Say that again.
Yet you have the iPod Touch of a little kid who runs out of the house in his underwear, right?
I said her underwear. There, we didn't know whose iPod Touch it was at the time.
Right. So answer this one. Is there a better chance you're going to get information relevant to this investigation in your search from the truth from an 8-year-old's iPod Touch or from Chief Miller's phone? Which one? Which one is likely to lead to a search for the truth? Just tell me.
So we didn't know whose iPod Touch that was.
Just answer my question. Which one is more likely to lead forward in a search for the truth? An iPod Touch or Chief Miller's computer? Which one is more likely?
I can't answer that question. They're
That's,
both.
if you can't answer that question,
They're both
if you can't
extremely
answer
possible.
that question, then I'm not sure I have anything further to talk to you about. And I might just finish right now, if you can't answer that question.
Objection, and ask the council's comments be stricken. There was no question.
Overruled.
In the course of this investigation, Special Agent Warpinski, you have spoken extensively with the prosecutors, right?
That's correct.
And you know that in many criminal cases in this courtroom, in this courthouse, it is customary for an NCIS agent to make him or herself available to also meet with the defense,
It's not
right?
customary. It's our option.
It's your option. And you know that each party is supposed to have an equal opportunity to prepare the case, an equal opportunity to interview witnesses and inspect evidence, right? That's rules of court martial 701. You don't have to know the number, but you know that principle, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, you know that Heather Hatcher made herself available to speak with the defense team in this case. You aware of that?
Yes.
And you're aware that your partner, Seth Goodwin, the guy who you have a very different interview style from, he made himself available to speak to the government. You're aware of that?
I wasn't aware of that, but
Okay. And you made yourself available to meet with me, correct?
I did not.
You did not.
I met with
I
the-
sent you an email or a message asking to meet and discuss this case several weeks ago, right?
That's correct.
And you didn't call me, right?
That's correct.
And I then sent you a whole bunch of questions about the case and your prior activities as a professional in an email, right?
That's correct.
And you didn't answer that, right?
That's correct.
And you would not speak with me even one time before we got to the courtroom, right? Right?
I did not speak to you once.
Even though you wouldn't speak with me one time, you spoke to Chief Miller before this case, right?
That's correct.
SO1 Breens,
Correct.
SO1 Scott,
Correct.
SO1 Tolbert,
Correct.
a whole hell of a lot, right?
I did.
Like hundreds of times, right?
Correct.
You ever speak to Major General Abbas?
I did.
How about Brian Gardner?
I do not believe.
Now, you spoke with, or you contacted, and I'm specifically talking about text messages now, right?
Okay.
Because we have no way, the members have no way of knowing how often you spoke on the telephone to the witnesses in this case and what you said to them, right?
That's correct.
All we know is the kinds of stuff you said in the interviews that I referred to before, focusing them in on Chief Gallagher, or what you wrote in your reports, right?
That's correct.
So we'll never know what kind of relationship you had with the witnesses over the phone. But we do have your text messages. And if Ms. Wilson will help me out, I'm going to place before you, and Judge, I'm just not sure if I should give a copy of the court reporter. I have one. We're going to be reading some of these, and whatever is the best practice.
What's the what's the intention of providing them? Are you refreshing his recollection? Are you crossing
I'm
him
gonna
with them?
refresh his recollection.
All right.
Mostly, I think I'm going to refresh his
As
recollection.
long as they're just used to refresh, they don't need to be marked. If your intention is to cross-examine him with them and have him read some of them, then they need to be marked as an appellate exhibit.
Okay, I think I'm going to start out with me reading them, but we'll see how that progresses.
Okay.
So if I may approach, I'm just going to put a stack that's base stamped 4875 through 5020 next to you in case you need to refresh your recollection, but don't take a look at it.
Absolutely.
And now I want to probe in on the text message relationships that you had with the witnesses in this case. Between April of 2018 and September of 2018, you texted Dylan DeLay and he texted you, correct?
Correct.
31 times. Does that sound about right?
Sounds about correct.
Between April 2018 and April 2019, you texted with Chief Miller, correct?
Correct.
121 times.
Sounds
Does that
correct.
sound about right?
Sounds correct.
With respect to SO1 Tolbert, between January of 2019 and April of 2019, you texted 114 times.
Sounds about correct.
And between April of 2018 and April of 2019, you texted with SO1 Brains 167 times,
Sounds
right?
about correct.
You're an impartial, unbiased fact finder. That's your job.
Correct.
You wouldn't text or email with me one time, and if we add up all those numbers, you were talking to the witnesses about 400 times, right?
Correct.
Now, before we start talking about some of the text messages, these contacts that you had with the witnesses, these were not just to schedule a meeting or schedule a date to talk. Some of them were, right?
Absolutely.
But not all of them, right?
Correct.
You shared your opinion of the case with witnesses, right?
Correct.
And you told us previously, sharing your opinion of the case with a witness is not a good practice, right?
Correct.
You directed witnesses to collect evidence for you that you could have collected yourself, right?
Yes, I did actually.
You did. You encouraged the witnesses to talk to each other by text message, right?
Not that I was trying to get them to coordinate stories. I was trying to get them
Let's
to.
take it one question at a time. You encouraged the witnesses to talk to each other, right?
The time I can think of was trying to get a hold of them because they weren't answering my calls. So yes.
Okay. You never stopped the witnesses by text message from talking to each other,
No.
correct?
No.
And you told us earlier, it's a bad investigative practice to let witnesses talk to each other. It could affect each of their testimony, right?
I said I didn't have any control over that. That's what I said earlier.
Well, you never told them to stop. I think you just said that. You did a couple favors for the witnesses, right? Over text message, and you talked about the favors.
Which favors?
Well, we're going to get there. But if you don't remember, you don't remember.
I don't recall a favor.
Okay. And you used false facts when you spoke to some of these witnesses by text message?
I don't recall that.
Okay, well, refresh your recollection. You disparaged lawyers in the case by text message, right?
I don't recall that.
Talked a little shit about the lawyers.
I don't recall.
All right, so before we start looking at these text messages, I just have some general questions.
Okay.
Did you take everything that you learned at the Federal Law Enforcement Academy and throw it in the garbage when you got this case?
No.
Did you, withdrawn, how fascinated with the media coverage of this case are you? Very fascinated or super fascinated? Which one?
I'm not fascinated.
Were you and the witnesses happy when Chief Gallagher got locked in the brig, or ecstatic? Answer that one. Which one? Happy or ecstatic?
Neither.
Did you deputize Craig Miller? Did you make him a deputy NCIS agent?
No.
Do you remember the name of the defense attorney that you called an idiot? Because I can refresh your recollection.
I do not recall.
You told us earlier that the media is not exactly always accurate in the way they portray things. I think that's a common sense
Agreed.
proposition. True or false? You directed several of the witnesses in this case to go check out the Navy Times, right?
I was letting them know an article had come out.
So they wouldn't read it? You were letting them know it was coming out so they would not read it?
No, I was just letting them know that
Aha, okay. So you were telling DeLay and Miller and Vreens, check out the Navy Times, right?
I was letting them know that it was getting publicity and news
Now,
stories were coming out.
That's not a practice. Having a witness read about a case and see what other people are saying about it in the media, that's not a practice that's taught at the NCIS training school, right?
It had to do with concerns for
Is
their.
it taught there or no?
It's
It's
not
not.
that it is or isn't. It's
No,
that-
but that's my question. And unfortunately, the way the rules of this game are, you have to answer my questions. So when the lieutenant stands up, you can answer his questions. Right now, you have to answer mine. My question is it a standard practice, is it a good practice for a fact finder sworn to uphold the Constitution, right? To tell the witnesses in the case, go check out what the media is saying about this, and thereby infect how they view the case. Good practice or not?
I don't. The problem is that it can be a good practice. It's letting when you deal with witnesses, when you deal with sources, letting them know that information is out there in the media, that news articles are coming out. Sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes
so-
when their names are released, it's necessary to let them know.
So you were encouraging them to read media accounts of the case. Is that your testimony?
No, I was letting them know that it was.
And I'm asking you what the good practice is. Is the good practice to have a witness's mind infected by what the media is saying about the case? Or is the better practice to have a witness give you their independent, unaffected, unvarnished testimony about a case?
Obviously, we would want the independent one, but there's
Thank you.
times when it's necessary.
Now, I think you mentioned that you recalled recognizing from the text messages that the witnesses were talking to each other, right?
That's correct.
And you knew, as you were investigating this case and trying to get each witness's independent recollection, that they were talking to each other.
That's correct.
You knew that Miller was talking to DeLay, right?
That's correct.
You knew that Vreens was talking to Stoner,
That's correct.
right? You knew that Miller was talking to McNeil, right?
I believe I asked Miller to get a hold of McNeil for me because I wasn't unable to get a hold of McNeil.
So Miller was doing your work for you. I mean, you did ask witnesses to collect evidence for you, right? And to talk to other people for you.
Yeah, like I
And didn't
explained.
you sort of ask Josh Vreens to sort of go undercover into the 5326 Facebook group and see if he could sort of infiltrate that group, right?
Absolutely. Just like I said earlier,
Okay.
sometimes people are in a position where I don't have the ability to collect that information.
Right, so you use the witnesses in this case to also be fact finders, right?
It's exactly like using a source in an investigation.
Except that they weren't a source. A source is somebody who gives you information. A witness is somebody who's going to get on the witness stand and testify and have their credibility challenged. And asking them to go do things for you is asking them to assume the job not of an independent witness, but of a guy who's working for NCIS. Is that a good practice? Yes or no?
In this
Yes
case,
or no?
it's not a yes or no question.
Okay, well, it's not a good practice either. Now, did you have withdrawn? Meddling lawyers were an annoyance to you? Is that fair to say?
That's true.
Right, and you wanted to stop McNeil from going to talk to his idiot attorney, right?
Not McNeil's. I didn't say that. Not McNeil's.
You didn't say that?
I don't recall it.
May I approach, Judge?
You may.
It's 4903. Does that refresh your recollection as to whether or not you wanted to cut out McNeil's idiot attorney?
I'm correct. That was not McNeil's attorney.
Okay, which idiot attorney was it that you were talking about?
Brian Ferguson, who did not represent McNeil.
How about expressing your opinion of the case to the witnesses by text message? Good practice or not?
That was bad practice.
Yeah. And so you are admitting to bad practices in connection with this case.
Sure, I made a mistake with that.
And one of the ways you made a mistake, and by the way, making mistakes, violating practices, like somebody's on trial for their life here. You got that?
Absolutely.
Objection argumentative.
Sustained.
I'd ask that the answering question be stricken.
We don't strike. I can provide curative instructions, but in this case, I choose just to sustain the objection. You may proceed, defense.
Thank you, Your Honor. By way of example, telling a witness, let's just say hypothetically SO2 Greens, don't worry about the shit that the defense is spewing. That's bad practice.
It's poor choice of words.
With respect to these hundreds of contacts between you and the witnesses, as you look back right now, can you agree that talking to the witnesses hundreds and hundreds of times and telling them what another one's saying or having them collect some evidence for you, not good practice?
There were definitely some mistakes. There were
And you
some that were
understand-
absolutely necessary.
And
but
you
there were some
understand
that
that these mistakes were made in connection with a serious and important case.
Yes.
You understand that the ramifications of having witnesses speak to each other, text each other, do your work for you, you can't control the ramifications, right? You will never know, and this is a pretty simple question. When you tell McNeil to call, withdrawn, when you tell Miller, can you get a hold of McNeil for me? Which you did, right?
That's correct. He
You
wouldn't
have
answer
no
the phone.
idea what Miller and McNeil are going to say to each other, right?
That's correct.
You have no idea if that conversation lasted for 3 seconds or 3 hours, right?
That's correct.
So when you let witnesses talk to each other, the ramifications of that are uncontrollable by you, right?
That's correct. I don't have control over what they say.
So if the witnesses are talking to each other and they're pursuing a common agenda, they want to stick it to Chief Gallagher. They want to remove him. They want to frame him. They want to accuse him. Once you let those witnesses talk to each other, they can conspire and create a story, right? Can't they?
They could.
You can't control that. That's my point.
They could, but
You
they
can't
could have done
control
that outside of any interaction with me as well.
But I'm only asking what you could control, and you never told them to stop.
That's correct.
Is it appropriate to ask a witness to do surveillance? Let me unpack that. Surveillance is part of one of your duties, right, on specific occasions,
Correct.
right? And by surveillance, I mean watching the suspect or a witness, right? Sometimes you sit in a car with a cup of coffee. Sometimes you go up in a tree. Whatever it is, you watch the suspect, right?
Correct.
Did you ask Josh Vreens to keep his eye on Chief Miller's house?
I didn't ask him.
I'm sorry, Chief Gallagher's house?
I didn't ask him to keep an eye on it. I just asked him if he saw a moving truck outside of it to let me know.
So you asked him to watch the house for a moving truck, right?
I wasn't telling him to watch the house. I said if he saw a moving truck, let me know.
Okay, and was he going to document that in a report, like an agent?
No, he
Or
would,
you just let him sort of do what he wanted to do?
this was in preparation for doing or conducting the search warrant on the residence.
Oh,
We
so
were-
Vreens was part of conducting the search warrant.
no,
Is that your testimony?
no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that
Let's talk about Dylan DeLay. At some point, you got a picture of a knife from Dylan DeLay, correct?
correct,
By text message, I mean.
correct,
And this is 10 days into the case,
correct,
approximately. And you are aware, at least on April 17, 2018, which is 7 days into the case, that Miller and DeLay, two of the witnesses who sat in this courtroom and testified here, two of the witnesses that you called upset with Chief Gallagher, you know they're talking to each other, 7 days into the case, right?
I don't remember the
Okay,
exact
I'm going to
conversation.
refresh your recollection about that.
Okay.
If I can approach with BS 4884.
You may.
Take it back, 4884. And I ask you again, 7 days into the case, you know that two of the witnesses are talking to each other, right?
That's correct,
And there's no text from you saying, please don't talk to each other about the case, right? You later texted Dylan DeLay, and you asked him about that picture of the knife that he texted. And you asked him, do you believe that's the same knife that was used on the ISIS prisoner? Right? And DeLay says to you, and I'll let you read this if you can't remember, that was the knife I believe he used on the ISIS prisoner. Right?
correct.
That was April 17th. DeLay tells you that's the knife I believe he used on the ISIS prisoner by text message. On April 11th, 6 days prior, didn't you ask DeLay, did you see the actual time that the prisoner was stabbed? And DeLay said, I didn't.
That's correct.
So DeLay didn't see it, he tells you in the video, but you don't give a damn about that. You just bust right through to the text message and say, is this the one he used on the prisoner?
I think DeLay said that he knew which knife Chief Gallagher was alleged to have
Aha,
used, and
even though he
that's
didn't
why.
see it.
That's correct.
We mentioned undocumented telephone calls. You had a bunch of those with Craig Miller, correct?
I had a number of them.
And were there times when you preferred to speak on the phone with the witnesses rather than put it in text message?
Yes,
And was that because you were violating NCIS guidelines?
no,
Okay, but we know you did violate NCIS guidelines, right? Or good practices, right?
there were mistakes made, yes.
Yes, there were mistakes made. You recall in May of 2016 asking Chief Miller, call me tonight. I want to share something with you.
I believe I said that, yes.
And tell us, as you sit here today, do you know what you said to him and what he said to you?
I don't recall exactly what I said in that
And
conversation.
that's the danger, right? You just put your finger on it. The members have no idea what you said to Miller and what Miller said to you, because you didn't put it in a text message. And now you're having undocumented conversations with the witnesses, and as you sit here right now, you don't know what it was about. Right? We'll never be able to discover that. We will have a reasonable doubt about that. We will have total doubt about that.
Objection, argumentative.
Overruled.
We will have no idea.
I'm almost certain what it was about
Okay,
setting up.
so if I want to know what it's about, I'll let you know. I asked you a little earlier about whether you were ecstatic or just plain happy that Chief Gallagher got locked in the brig. Would you say that Josh Breens was a cheerleader in terms of getting Chief Gallagher locked up? Yes or no?
I don't think cheerleader is an appropriate way to put it.
Hell yes, nice work? That doesn't sound like cheerleader?
I know that Josh was fearing for his safety at that point.
Uh-huh. You mentioned a little earlier General Abbas, right?
That's correct.
And he's an Iraqi general, right?
That's correct.
And he's in the ERD,
Correct.
right? And you said, I think you said you spoke to him, right?
That's correct. I only spoke to him when he was here.
Okay.
And then also once.
And you found out from Craig Miller and the Miller NCIS investigation who Abbas was, right? That's not something you discovered. Yes or no?
I believe we located pictures of General Boss before Miller had found pictures of him as well.
Well, I'll direct your memory to April of 2018, and Craig Miller sent you a picture of an Iraqi general, right?
Yeah, I believe he did.
And you asked him if that was Abbas, right?
What was the date on that?
April 15, 16.
By April 12th, we already had pictures ourselves, General
Okay.
Boss, and
then
had
you
confirmed
said
them
to-
with
Then you
Dylan
said
DeLay.
to Chief Miller, okay, cool. I have him ID'd, and he should be interviewed soon. Right?
That's correct.
Now, thank God people got Abbas's testimony, but I'm putting that aside for a second. You're telling Chief Miller what's going to happen in your investigation. We're going to interview General Abbas, right?
Correct.
Good practice or bad practice?
That was probably poor choice.
Now, I used the term cheerleader before. I think I've established what good, bad practice is. Around November of 2018, you became aware that Chief Miller had spoken with a psychologist on the way home from a deployment in Germany, right?
That's correct.
I think the psychologist was in Germany on the way home from the deployment. And Miller told you maybe you want to talk to the psychologist, right?
Correct.
See what that person knows. And I'm not disparaging anybody who speaks to a psychologist, because God knows I probably need one, but Craig Miller, after he tells you that, maybe you want to talk to that psychologist. You say to Craig Miller, tell me if you recall this, holy shit, that's amazing. That's great evidence for us. Now, I don't care whether it's great evidence or it's not great evidence, or whether you followed up or you didn't, and you didn't, right?
We tried to.
Okay, well, telling, and this is again back to the practices that we talked about, telling a witness, holy shit, this is great evidence. You think that might have a tendency to affect the witness and what they think about the case?
I was just trying to let him know that I appreciated him sending us that information so we could try and track it down.
Having an effect on the witness is what I'm driving to, right? You're not supposed to be the witness's pal, right?
Correct?
You're not supposed to be their cheerleader, right?
Correct.
You're not supposed to push them on and pat them on the back. You're supposed to be an independent, unbiased, impartial fact finder. Yes or no?
Yes.
I know you got reports of people's deployments that you interviewed, right? Their deployment history or their command history?
Are you talking about like their official military personnel files?
Exactly.
Yes.
And you collected those from most of the witnesses, correct?
That's correct.
You never asked anybody in any interview to describe for you their prior combat experience, right?
There were a number of them that I asked about the previous deployments.
You didn't ask Miller? And I'm not asking about deployment. I'm talking about in the field combat experience. You didn't ask Miller about that, did you?
Not in the first interview.
You didn't ask Corey Scott about it? You didn't ask Dylan DeLay about it? You didn't ask SO1 Tolbert about it? You didn't ask Vreens about it? You asked about deployment generally, right?
I did.
Not about their feelings about combat and being in combat on prior deployments. It's an easy question.
No.
You never asked any of the witnesses who were in the compound that day who the last person to physically touch the terrorist was. I didn't see that in any transcripts.
In those words, no.
You never asked anybody, meaning the witnesses, why the knife that has become so interesting to people in this case doesn't have any blood on it. You never asked Miller that, you never asked Scott that, you never asked DeLay that, you never asked Tolbert that, you never asked Villanueva that, right?
Well, at the time, we didn't have photographs of the knife.
Okay, but you never went back and asked any of them, why doesn't this knife have any blood on it, right?
I don't recall specifically asking that exact question.
And you never got into it with anybody in any serious conversation, extended conversation, in terms of the witnesses, about what the ERD would have done to this terrorist had they gotten their hands on it.
There were discussions with those initial witnesses about it.
You didn't ask whether officially this guy was a detainee, whether he was a prisoner, whether he was an enemy combatant, right? You didn't ask anybody those questions.
It was discussed.
Where?
It was,
Where?
It was discussed when they brought him in, and some of these guys described that it was unclear what this
When
guy
they
was.
brought him in, it was discussed?
It
Were you
was-
talking about what was said in Iraq?
No, I'm talking
I'm
about.
talking about your interview questions and answers and the transcripts that I have and the reports that I have. Nowhere in the videos, nowhere in your reports do you document that you questioned somebody about the status of the prisoner or whether he was a prisoner.
Those exact words.
Okay.
I don't know if it was asked that exact way.
You never asked anybody whether they saw how the ERD handled this terrorist on his way to the compound, right?
That's correct.
You never asked anybody whether the ERD threw this guy around, or pushed him around, or beat him, right?
There were some of the witnesses that
I'm
described.
not asking what the witnesses told you. I'm asking what you asked them, what you pursued with them. We know you locked them in on Eddie Gallagher. I'm asking what you didn't ask them. You never asked them, hey, Corey Scott, Dylan DeLay, Chief Miller, tell me what the ERD did to this guy. Tell me how the ERD treated this guy. Tell me what you heard about it. You never asked that, right?
We asked, yes, we asked about how he was brought in, the condition that he was brought in.
Okay, but we all know that. I'm asking what happened in between. What the ERD, did they hit him on the way to the compound? Did they beat him? Did they cut him? You never asked that, right?
I asked about what they knew about as far as when they started to see him. Chief Miller, for example, he saw him when he was brought in.
Okay,
He had
do you
no-
want
he
me
didn't-
to, let me break the question down because I think you're not hearing me. There was a period of time after this terrorist was captured that he was thrown in a car, in a Humvee, and driven to the compound, right?
Correct.
You never asked anybody if they knew what happened inside that car. Yes or no?
Can I clarify that it wasn't put inside of a car? It was put on top
Okay.
of the Humvee, but I don't.
We can debate about that, what it was done before he was put on the Humvee, on the hood.
I don't think I would ask specifically.
You didn't ask that.
Did
Okay.
they?
Thank you. And one moment, Judge.
You may.
SO1 Brins moved into the neighborhood where Gallagher lived?
No,
The Gallagher family lived?
no.
Do you know when Brins wrote a particular statement concerning his fears, whether it was before or after Chief Gallagher was locked up?
It was after.
It was after. Okay, thank you. I really just have one final question, maybe two. You never asked Corey Scott the cause of death, did you?
I didn't say it in those exact words.
Okay. And maybe the biggest question that I don't think you asked in the course of this mistake-ridden investigation was, you knew that Chief Gallagher was a Marine corpsman before he moved to the SEALs?
He was a corpsman.
Yeah. And a SEAL medic, right?
That's correct.
Sniper?
That's correct.
Sailor of the Year?
That's correct.
And you know that he was 18, 19 years in at this point, right?
That's correct.
And you never asked any witness in this case, not in the hundreds of text messages, or the videos, or the meetings, or your reports, or when you made arrests, you never asked anybody why an 18-year decorated combat warrior who'd spend his life training to help people and helping people would get down on his knees, open his medical bag, start applying life-saving procedures, and then all of a sudden, completely out of nowhere, flip a switch and decide to kill the guy. You never asked anybody that question, did you?
Not in those exact words.
Thank
We asked
you.
him.
No further questions.
Special Agent Warpinski. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Special Agent Warpinski, at the end of cross-examination, counsel asked you a very long question about whether you had asked, I think essentially the witnesses why they thought Chief Gallagher had stabbed the ISIS detainee. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Or why they thought he had shot at the unarmed non-combatants that they testified about.
That's correct.
Did you ask witnesses about that?
I did.
And without going into the content of what they told you about that, did many of those witnesses provide you their takes on why they thought Chief Gallagher did the things that they saw?
They did.
And you'll have to excuse me, Special Agent Warpinski, I'm going to jump around a little bit here and try to respond to specific things where you may not have had a chance to explain yourself. You were asked about a particular phone call with Chief Craig Miller. Do you recall that?
I recall.
And you began to, after being asked what that phone call was about, you began to explain what your recollection of what that phone call was about.
I believe it was to coordinate a meeting to bring Miller in, or to meet up with Chief Miller.
Did Petty Officer Vrines express to you fear of Chief Gallagher following his decision to report what he knew?
Yes.
Did Chief Craig Miller express to you fear of Chief Gallagher for his decision to report what he had seen?
Yes.
You were asked some questions about having Petty Officer Vrines conduct surveillance, so to speak, on Chief Gallagher's home. Can you explain that for us, Special Agent Warpinski?
Yeah, absolutely. This isn't a surveillance operation. They lived close by each other. It was, if you see something, let us know. It's the exact same thing. If any of these witnesses had heard anything is the same thing as like you start to hear something, let me know as well. It was, if you get additional information, please let me know. It wasn't that he was tasked with going out and keeping an eye on Chief Gallagher's house.
And pulling back the lens a little bit, some of the questions counsel asked you about in terms of this idea of a witness as a source versus a witness as a witness. I want to explore that topic a little bit.
Okay.
Are there times when it is appropriate as an investigator to ask a witness if there's information that they can retrieve?
Yes.
And can you kind of explain in general when some of those times might be?
One of the easiest and one of the most common ones we do is a pretext phone call, a conversation between two people who know each other, and we will record it. That's a position where I could never, as an NCIS agent, just call somebody who might be a suspect. Well, if you get a witness who might be friends with them, you could have that witness potentially call the suspect. That's an example of a witness who's in a position to help us with an investigative step that I myself could not do.
So in relation to this case in particular, for instance, at the start of your investigation when General Abbas was referenced, had you ever seen him?
No.
Did you know what he looked like?
No.
Had Chief Craig Miller seen General Abbas?
Yes.
So did you ask Chief Craig Miller, hey, if you have a picture of General Abbas, could you maybe provide that to me so I have a frame of reference?
Yes.
On a similar note, I want to turn to, there was some discussion of a particular Facebook group called 5326. What is that?
It's a closed Facebook group that's members of the Naval Special Warfare community are in it.
And what do you mean when you say it's a closed Facebook group?
The posts are not accessible to anybody who is not a member of the group. You can't even actually see that the group exists unless you're invited to the group by somebody who's either an administrator or a member of the group.
And in the course of your investigation, did you receive information that Chief Gallagher was attempting to have members of the community post the names of the witnesses against him on that very group?
Yes.
Objection, hearsay.
Response?
Not offered for the truth of the matter asserted, but to explain the investigative step that was attacked on cross-examination.
All right, I'll overrule the objection, but members keep in mind that the testimony is not being admitted for the truth of the matter within the testimony, but merely to show the investigative steps taken by the witness. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. So going back to that question, did you receive information that Chief Gallagher was encouraging members of the special warfare community to post the names of the witnesses against him on that Navy SEAL group?
Yes.
And since it was a closed group, were you able to access it?
No.
So what was the next step you took in trying to find out or trying to collect evidence in relation to that Facebook group and those posts?
It's trying to find somebody in a position to have that information who could assist. It was something that myself, I could not get that information, so I reached out to the witnesses to try and get in to access that information.
And in fact, did some of the text messages that were admitted into evidence yesterday through you on direct examination discuss potential text messages from Chief Gallagher's phone to those other contacts? Did those in fact discuss the content of posts to that group?
Yes.
I want to turn for a little bit to SO1 Corey Scott. How many times, if you can recall, did you meet with Petty Officer Scott?
I believe 3 times.
And did you meet with him both prior to him being granted immunity and following him being granted immunity?
Yes.
And do you recall when he was granted immunity?
Early January 2018 early January 2019 or late December. It was somewhere right around the new year.
And then did you meet with him subsequent to that grant of immunity?
Yes.
And when you met with him, was that grant of immunity extended to the contents of his conversation with you in that meeting?
Yes.
So while in that meeting, with nothing he could be used, or nothing in that meeting could be used against him, did you give him an opportunity to review the prior statements that he made?
Yes.
And at that point, did he tell you about how, no, in fact, it was me that killed the ISIS detainee?
No.
Did you ask him follow-up questions in those post-immunity meetings under that grant of immunity?
Yes.
Did you ask him follow-up questions about all the observations and things he knew about that day?
Yes.
Did you ask him questions like, what happened next?
The specific ones about what happened next were prior to the grant of immunity and reviewed post the grant of immunity.
But did you ask him if he had any corrections or changes or significant additions to make to that first interview he did with you?
Yes, and he was allowed to review his report and the video recording of his first interview.
I want to turn now to some of these questions about the crime scene that you were asked. To be clear, did you send out leads or request for assistance to investigate the crime scene in Iraq?
Yes.
And can you describe which ones you sent out?
There were multiple attempts. Originally, Agent Seth Goodwin and myself were attempting to get visas and secure our travel to Iraq in order to conduct the crime scene ourselves. But after delay with the visa process as well as issues with getting clearance in the country, we had to rely on Special Agent Dave Clack, and we sent him a lead requesting that he conduct a crime scene investigation and a number of interviews related to the compound and related to the towers from which some of these offenses are alleged to have occurred.
And when did you send that lead?
September, either August or September of 2018.
Did you send out leads requesting assistance to attempt to locate the body, even though it was over a year after the incident when you first learned of this case?
Yes.
And were attempts made to locate the body?
Yes.
Were morgues contacted in Iraq to see if they might be of assistance?
They determined and told us that there were no credible morgue records or hospital records for the Mosul area at the time.
You were asked a couple of quick questions about missing portions or silenced portions of my video interview, or excuse me, not my video interview, the witness's video interviews. Is it standard policy for NCIS at the start of an interview to ask witnesses to provide their identifying information?
Yes.
And what is some of that identifying information that's provided?
Name, date of birth, social security number, address, vehicle information, command, height, weight, entry on duty, just varying information, phone number, spouse's information.
And to your knowledge, does my office at Reelso Southwest Trial Department, do we frequently butt heads with you because we're not allowed to pass that information on?
That's correct.
And are you aware that it's normal practice then for my office to then redact social security number and personally identifiable information from those interviews?
Yes.
I want to turn now to the warrant, and you were asked some questions about that warrant. Who at the time, well, do you recall when you applied for that federal warrant?
June 19th, 2018.
Who had you interviewed in this case to date on that warrant?
I know I'm probably going to miss a few, but Craig Miller, Corey Scott, Ivan Villanueva, Josh Vines, Dylan DeLay, Tom McNeil, Joe Arrington.
And
I'm probably missing a couple.
And defense head counsel asked you a couple of questions about specific paragraphs within that warrant, or one specific paragraph related to Craig Miller. I think that I'm looking at it was paragraph 7. Do you recall how many total paragraphs made up the actual probable cause declaration that you gave to that judge to ask for permission to search that house?
I don't recall the exact number, but it's quite lengthy.
Would looking at that warrant refresh your recollection as to the number of paragraphs that made up that probable cause declaration?
Yes, it would.
Your Honor, permission to approach?
May?
Showing counsel what begins at 314. And please just go ahead and skim that, and when you determine how many paragraphs made up your probable cause declaration of that warrant, please just look up. And how many retrieving the item from the exhibit or witness? How many paragraphs made up that probable cause declaration?
Paragraphs 5 through paragraphs 36.
Did you, when you spoke to Chief Craig Miller about the incident on that first interview prior to this warrant, did he tell you that he had seen the prisoner alive?
Yes.
Did he tell you he'd seen the prisoner alive receiving treatment?
Yes.
Did he then tell you that he left the area? Is that correct?
That's correct.
When he came back, what did he see when he came back?
Objection, leading.
I'll sustain, but you rephrased to ask what he saw when he came back, so to that extent, it's overruled. Would you re-ask that question?
Yes, Your Honor. What did Chief Miller tell you he saw in that first interview prior to the warrant when he came back to the detainee a second time?
Chief Gallagher stabbing the ISIS prisoner.
Did he then make any statements to you regarding the prisoner's condition following seeing that stabbing?
Yes.
And what did he tell you was the prisoner's condition after the stabbing?
Said after that stabbing, the individual lost all signs of life.
What did that warrant, that federal search warrant from that judge, the defense counsel described, what did that authorize you to get when you went to Chief Gallagher's home?
There was a number of things, including all electronic devices, any knives that fit the description for what we were looking for with what was described from the individuals, the communications between Chief Gallagher and a number of witnesses, and then a number of other things.
Why did you talk to Chief Miller initially when he was the first person you interviewed on this case about a source number?
Originally, what our intention was, because we were told there was fear in these witnesses for what potentially could happen, they were afraid of Chief Gallagher. And so what our intention was is to treat these individuals like sources, to put them in as a source number like we do when we have a confidential informant. Once we got into a number of interviews, I think after 4 of these, we realized you just couldn't write these reports and keep their identities secret because each one of the reports references every other platoon member. And so if you have a source number who's only identified in a report by a number and not his name, but you reference every other platoon member, it's very obvious who the source would be. And so we took other steps instead of putting these individuals as sources. It's made by our at the supervisory level. Instead of putting them as sources, like we originally intended, we held on to the information. We didn't provide all of the reports to command immediately until a significant portion of the investigation was complete.
Thank you, Special Agent. Moving on to a more general topic, when is it appropriate to give someone their 31 Bravo rights?
When you suspect them of committing a criminal offense.
When a witness comes in to report having seen a crime to you, before you've ever had a chance to speak to that witness, do you have any knowledge about their agenda as defense counsel asked you about it?
No.
Is there any way that you would have knowledge about any agenda they might bring in there?
No.
Is it appropriate then to read every single witness who's coming to you to report seeing a crime? Is it appropriate then to read them their 31 Bravo rights?
Absolutely not.
Just one moment, Your Honor, my apologies. Now, moving on to another topic. Defense counsel had a chance to ask you questions about text messages that you sent to the witnesses. And is it your testimony, Special Agent Warpinski, that within those text messages, you did make some investigative mistakes?
That's true.
What was the original purpose often of texting those witnesses?
Every single person that I interview, whether it's a victim of a crime, a victim of sexual assault, a victim of an assault, whatever, a witness in any case, or a suspect that I interrogate in any case, I provide them with my contact information. So that if they change their mind, they want to provide further information later, something comes to mind, they have the ability to reach out and provide information to me.
Did all of these witnesses that you were texting with, to your knowledge, did they already know each other?
Yes.
Did they already have each other's contact information?
Yes.
Did you ever tell them to conspire together and get their story straight?
No.
On cross-examination, you were asked about a list of individuals in Alpha Platoon. Were there individuals that you attempted to interview in this case but were not able to?
Yes.
And did those individuals decline to be interviewed, as is their right, when you requested to interview them?
Some of them, yes.
And then were there other individuals that, through themselves or through counsel, proactively reached out to you before you ever could contact them and said, hey, we don't want to be interviewed?
Yes.
How many total potential witnesses did either of those two scenarios occur in this case?
I believe 11 from the platoon. Excuse me, 12.
So your recollection right now is there's 12 witnesses declined to be interviewed in various meets.
It's 12, yes, that's correct.
And that's all witnesses from the platoon?
That's correct. Or their support personnel who are deployed with them.
In your interview with Chief Miller that you were asked extensively about, did you tell him that Chief Gallagher stabbed that ISIS prisoner?
No.
Or did he tell you that?
He told me that.
Did you tell Dylan DeLay that he saw Chief Gallagher shoot an unarmed old man?
No.
Did you tell any of these witnesses what they saw and what they reported?
No.
If I could have a moment, Your Honor.
You may.
Nothing further this time, Your Honor.
Cross?
10 seconds, Your Honor. Thank you. Those folks who declined to be interviewed were active military members.
Yes.
You could have exerted some process to get them interviewed, correct?
I don't have a process for it.
But a process exists to order them to be interviewed, right?
That's correct.
Okay, with respect, just briefly, to the 31 Bravo issue, I think you said you read only those suspected of a crime. 31 Bravo, is that right?
That's correct. Well, it's individuals who are suspected of a crime, or I'm going to ask them questions that are directly implicate them, where I suspect that they might
So
be.
you knew that various individuals that you interviewed in this case were suspected of a crime of not reporting, right?
The way that the information came is that it was reported to the lieutenant.
Okay.
So our office,
You knew that was an issue in the case, right?
I did.
Okay. And you knew there was the possibility, theoretically, of a crime for being in the platoon photo, right?
Yes,
And you still told the witnesses you weren't looking at any of their activity, you weren't going to read them 31 Bravo, right?
it wasn't.
Just a simple question.
No, well,
Okay. With respect to the 5326 Facebook group,
mhm.
none of the names of the witnesses you talked about here were ever posted on that group, right?
I don't know.
Are you familiar with a witness named, or a platoon MARSOC member named Giorgio Cirillo?
Yes,
You attempt to interview him?
I attempted to get him to come to my office for an interview. Yes,
You had an altercation at a time when he had just recovered from shoulder surgery.
there was no altercation.
Did you put your hands on him?
I-
Yes or no?
Gently touched him on his back
Okay,
just as he was walking through the door.
that's your testimony.
That's exactly my testimony.
You said that you provide every witness your contact information, right?
That's correct.
Do you provide every witness a gun?
No,
You did that for Chief Miller, right? You helped him get a gun, didn't you?
no,
You did not serve as a reference for Chief Miller in a concealed carry permit application?
it wasn't a reference. I told him that.
Did you communicate with the law enforcement agency, I think it was in New Mexico, that was going to issue that permit? Yes or no?
No,
Okay, do you have a text message where you say to Miller that you're going to get it, maybe it's San Diego. Was it a San Diego agency?
yes,
Okay, and it's a text message where you communicate with that agency.
where I, can you ask a question again? I just want to make sure I know exactly what you
Did you
said.
communicate with a law enforcement agency that was going to get him the concealed carry permit?
Yes,
Did you attempt to get it expedited? No?
no,
Did you find out that it might have been expedited?
yes,
Okay. And was that some sort of quid pro quo for Chief Miller? He
No.
gives you testimony, you help him get a gun?
there was
Yes,
no
yes, yes.
assistance in helping him get a gun. There were no proactive steps taken from my part. I was contacted by the law enforcement agency.
You informed
I
him,
took no steps in order
you
to
informed
assist
Chief
us.
Miller that the process was working and it was going to be expedited, right?
That's what I told him. After
Okay.
being told that by a different law enforcement agency that I
With
took
res-
no proactive steps on.
With respect to the search warrant that the lieutenant asked you about, I think you said there were something like 45 paragraphs in that warrant,
I believe I said 5 through 36 for the probable cause. That's what I said.
and there, I think the lieutenant asked you, how many paragraphs is this, and what's, how big is it, and is it just one little section of the search warrant, right?
He asked me,
Remember those questions?
he asked me which ones were probable cause, and I said 5 through 36.
Okay. There's about 45 paragraphs total, but
Sounds
we
about
can
right.
focus on the 36. Of those paragraphs in the search warrant, the whole search warrant, let's just take all 45 paragraphs. Want me to show you?
Okay.
Sorry, what are we refreshing him to right now?
I apologize, Judge, and I'm just going to request permission to briefly approach and refresh for the search warrant that is date stamp 2550.
What's the matter we're refreshing him to, though? Just the general nature of the,
How long the search warrant was.
okay.
45 paragraphs long?
44.
In those 44 paragraphs, how many of them are you allowed to lie in?
I didn't lie in any of them.
I have nothing further.